Good.
We're live.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Committee of Adjustment and regular council meeting for Monday, May the 31st. We're going to start with Committee of Adjustment this evening, so we'll call that meeting to order. Tonight we have a public meeting being held under sections 45 sub 5 of the Planning Act to consider two minor variance applications. Number one is application A21-03 and is for the property located at 741 Hulbert Drive. The purpose and effect of this application is to request relief from section 5.68 of zoning bylaw number 38-2007 in order to construct a converted dwelling with a second dwelling unit in the cellar of the existing single detached dwelling. Second minor variance is application A21-04, and that is for the property located at 900 Main Street East. The purpose and effect of this application is to request relief from the definition of front lot line within zoning bylaw number 38-2007 to establish the lot boundary adjoining Main Street East as the front lot line. I will now ask the clerk for the method of notice for tonight's public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources as of May 13th, 2021. Notice has been posted on the town's website, and property owners within a 60-meter radius have received notification.
Okay, so in the case of each application tonight, we'll have a presentation by the town planner who will provide a summary of the written comments received, following which there'll be an opportunity for committee members as well as members of the public who are signed in to ask questions and provide any comments that they may have. So with that, Steve, turn it over to you and you can take us through the first application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've just shared my screen for the slides that we have prepared for this first application, A2103. This is for 741 Halbert Drive. Ms. Osborne, the applicant, I believe is here with us tonight to assist with answering any questions that the committee may have. So brief overview of the subject property. It's in the Greenbrook Village subdivision on the north side of Halbert Drive. Greenbrook is characterized as entirely single detached dwellings, generally on 40-foot lots. This is just a simple site plan of the existing dwelling. So there's no changes to the size of the dwelling or any of the characteristics of the lot proposed. Just to orient you a little bit to this drawing. So the front of the house is over here on Halbert Drive. There is a 2-car wide driveway in front of a 2-car double garage with 2 parking spaces. So there's at least 4 parking spaces available. There is a porch, a covered porch at the front, and then the 2-story dwelling and an existing deck attached to the back of the dwelling. So the applicant has provided detailed floor plans of the proposed renovation to the basement or the lower level of the dwelling. This is illustrating the proposed basement apartment unit. It would have 2 bedrooms, and there's a kitchen shown, living, dining room, storage room. Entrance would be through the main floor of the dwelling via the stairwell here. And there is a utility room as well as washroom and laundry room. So it doesn't change the outside extent of the dwelling and really just renovates the existing dwelling. Some of the windows are changed a little bit on the in terms of the size of the basement windows. So why is an application required? This is similar to a previous application considered by the committee a few weeks ago. That one was for a very similar property in Greenbrook Village, where they were looking to construct an apartment in the lower level, but according to the zoning bylaw, where the lower level is more than 50% below the average grade around the house, it is considered a cellar. In more of a bungalow type construction or walkout type construction, most of the basement is, or the lower level is above grade, in that case, it's considered a basement. So those are just the zoning definitions, maybe not what people customarily think of in terms of a cellar versus a basement. It doesn't mean that the lower level of the dwelling, in this case on the sketch provided, is unusable for a dwelling or uninhabitable. It just means that the zoning definition has classified that differently because of the amount of the vertical space that's below grade. Why that's important in the zoning bylaw is that the bylaw says that a cellar cannot be used for a dwelling unit. So there would be nothing in the bylaw that would prevent the lower level from being renovated for some bedrooms, for some living space, for whatever habitable space would normally be part of a dwelling. However, as soon as you add a kitchen and washroom along with the proposed bedrooms, by definition, it becomes a dwelling unit, and that's where the bylaw says you can't have a dwelling unit in the cellar, and that's why a variance is requested to allow the lower level to be used for a dwelling. So that's really all I had by way of slides. There's more information provided in my report. Importantly, all of these variance applications that come to the committee are subject to the same 4 tests. Those tests have been summarized in my report and evaluated. Much of this is a very similar analysis to the previous similar applications that this committee has considered. Generally, this type of change in many municipalities, and according to the Planning Act of Ontario, is something that the zoning bylaw should provide for. However, because the zoning bylaw is dated, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, doesn't currently permit a typical lower level of a home to be used as a second dwelling unit. The Planning Act of Ontario does say that municipalities throughout the province are required in their zoning bylaws to make provision for a second unit within an existing single detached dwelling or within a new single detached dwelling when it's constructed. That's subject to some requirements, such as the requirement to require up to 1 additional parking space in addition to the spaces that may be required for the main dwelling, as well as servicing capacity. And I know that one has been weighing on these applications heavily of late because the remaining unallocated capacity in the town's wastewater treatment plant is diminishing. There is a report on the council agenda later tonight for council consideration of some recommendations of establishing a small reserve to allow for this kind of thing in the stage 1 and 2 service area. Basically the area where there are existing services and dwellings that may seek some renovations like this one to have a second unit. However, we have recommended condition if this is considered by the committee for approval tonight, since you have not as council yet considered the report that's on the agenda later tonight, that there would be, depending on the outcome of that report and whether a reserve is set as an outcome of that, it would be delegated to the town engineer to decide whether there is capacity, and that would be required for final approval of the variance. There have been some submissions in response to the circulation of this application. In particular, there have been 2 public objections and some responses from the applicant. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that I can access the letters that have been submitted. So this is actually the second submission that came in, but it's the first one that came up on my screen. So it's from the neighbor to the, I believe, the west, 737 Halbert Drive. Mr. Len Sutherland has submitted a 1-page letter. I won't read it because there's a lot of points raised, but I'll just highlight some of the key concerns raised by Mr. Sutherland. Mr. Sutherland notes that he and his wife both work from home exclusively. And so that they're aware of the comings and goings in the neighborhood, that they're surprised by the application notice for the variance. They've said or indicated that the applicant has been renting space in the home on and off since purchasing the property in 2015. That they weren't happy about that when they learned that that was occurring. They didn't take any action about that. They indicate that the tenant, former tenant residing in the home in one incident became intoxicated and entered a neighbor's home at 733 Halbert and went to sleep on their bed. They said the matter was resolved without incident. They indicated that the neighbor moved shortly after the incident. They've also indicated that those tenants have since moved on, and the tenants since then have been of no concern. He's asked the question, how many people will be allowed to reside in the basement? Would it be a single person, a couple, a family of 6? How will they enter the home? Is a new entrance planned? And if so, where? Is the applicant planning on maintaining residence at 741 Halbert? Is the plan to rent the upstairs to one family and the basement to another family? Next, they've raised some concerns about parking, indicating there are already 3 to 5 cars at the applicant's residence daily. There's no overnight parking on the street in the winter months, and the street is already full of cars nightly, as everyone seems to have 5 to 6 cars per household, with driveways designed for 4 cars. And then further to this parking point, Mr. Sutherland notes that the applicant also works from home, that the applicant has customers often parking illegally despite the no parking signs in front of the applicant's home, in front of his home, and when there's no parking on the legal side of the street. He's indicated this is a hazard for emergency vehicles who may need to use the roadway, that it's also caused snow plowing issues as illegally parked cars force the plows to go around, leaving the homeowner affected to remove the snow. He's concerned about what this could do to his home's value, then, and if he decided to sell, he would have to disclose a rental unit next door to the future purchasers. Mm-hmm. And then finally, living next to a home with 9 occupants and 12 cars, as an example, is what he would say is not his vision of a quiet, safe community living, which is the reason for moving to the area in 2014. Finally, Mr. Sutherland has suggested that if the applicant wants to be a landlord, could do so in a properly zoned city setting. The other letter, just bear with me while I find it here. Getting a little bit of delay from my computer here, sorry for that. There we go. Okay, this letter is from the resident of 745 Halbert. Her name is Natalie Godet or Godet. Ms. Godet notes that she received the meeting notice letter on May 10th regarding the application for minor variance. She's indicated that unfortunately she cannot attend the meeting, but has strong reservations for an added unit, which would increase what seems to be an already busy home with ongoing home aesthetics business, which has remained open irrespective of current restrictions. In addition, Ms. Godet notes that they've sold their property now at 745 Halbert and will be moving on July 9th. And with that said, can only suggest to defer this to a later time to allow the new owners of 745 Halbert, once it's sold, to have a say in the change that's proposed. So in reply to that, the applicant, Ms. Osborne, has provided some information and some references. We just want to make sure, some of this came in late, so it wasn't included with the report. I just wanted to make sure that the committee has this information or is aware of this information. Again, bear with me while I find the right correspondence. Okay, so Ms. Osborne, the applicant, was made aware of these comments from the neighbors, and in response indicated that there is not a business operating from the home, that there are no outside employees employed. The aesthetics business that was referenced was not a business, but was a hobby, and was provided for friends and family, specifically her daughter. That in 2015, Miss Osborne moved to Shelburne to take care of her terminally ill mother, which required her to quit her job in the plumbing industry and care for her full time. This responsibility consumed her entire day. She invested in supplies to lighten a very dark situation and provide self-care services for herself, her daughter, and for her mother. After her mother's passing, she enjoyed this hobby and continued to offer the service to friends. She's currently a full-time employee as a residential youth counselor and attended university online while completing a bachelor's degree. She has attached documentation supporting her employment status, as well as some information about some health conditions she's had to deal with and some surgery. And that although the residents may have appeared to be busy, she has required intensive support for her recovery from healthcare professionals. So she would like to add that in the mid of summer 2020, that the neighbor built a garden shed that did not meet the bylaw. However, Ms. Osborne did not complain about that, but was accused of complaining about it. Since that discussion and the shed being relocated, there has not been any interaction between Ms. Osborne and Mrs. Godet, according to this letter. And then finally, Ms. Osborne mentions that the basement is not intended for income purposes. It's intended for her adult son, who's 21, who resides at the property already and will be living in the lower level with a partner. And that this allows them to continue to work and have the support they need with a newborn expected in the near future, and allowing privacy and space for the rest of the family. So she has provided some information about the health support that she's been receiving, and from those individuals who have been providing that support as some evidence of why people have been coming and going. She has provided a letter from her employer confirming her full-time employment elsewhere. And she has provided some reference letters. And again, bear with me as I locate those. I've got lots of things open. So one of these reference letters is from Mr. Brian Walker. He indicates that he works for Cadem Custom Contracting and has known Ms. Osborne for over 2 years, that Ms. Osborne has hired him to renovate the home, both the upstairs and the main floor. That he is a contractor who will be creating the legal basement apartment if the variance is approved, and that he would just wanted to indicate that any of the times that he's visited the home, it's been well maintained and quiet, that the only people residing there are her partner, her 3 children, and herself, that he has never seen another person or tenant living there, that he lives beside a rental property on Maryland Street in Shelburne and has never had any issues with excessive traffic or parking, that anyone has the right to rent out parts of their home for income purposes if they choose to, that Shelburne's housing market is quickly increasing, which means home prices aren't necessarily affordable for everyone, and more rental properties would help people who aren't in a position to buy but would like to remain in the small town. And then finally, he notes that he thinks for resale value, having a separate rental unit in the home is appealing to a lot of people and does increase the price overall, which is helpful as a comparable for other residents on the street. There is a couple of other reference letters.
Sorry, Your Worship, do we need to go through all these reference letters?
I just wanted to make you aware of the public submissions that came in late, but suffice it to say, they're to vouch for the current conditions that Ms. Osborne has indicated in her letter. So no real additional points. So I'll leave it there.
Okay.
And at this point, to summarize, subject to the input received tonight from the committee and from the public, we have recommended that the committee consider a conditional approval, again, with the condition being that servicing be confirmed by the town engineer prior to municipal approval, if council were to grant a reserve for the stage 1 and 2 area. So between myself and the applicant, we'll do our best to address any questions that the committee or public may have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Are there any questions from the committee? Member Bonato and then Member Wagner.
The amount of vehicles that are there, I guess, and I'd ask the applicant, how many vehicles park there on a permanent basis? Because the neighbors seem to indicate that there's a lot of vehicles ending up on the street, and that may or may not be true, but I'd like to know how many vehicles are really parked there on a full-time basis.
At my residence, there's 3 vehicles. And to address the vehicles on the street, the resident at 745 removed the no parking sign from their lawn 3 years ago, which resulted in 6 consecutive houses that had that did not have a no parking sign. May 2nd, I believe the no parking sign was replaced. So that should alleviate any of the parking on our side of the street.
Okay, now I'm just interested in what was parking in your particular residence, and if you say 3 vehicles are parked there, that's fine. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Member Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much. Is there going to be a separate entrance where the apartment would be accessible from the outside?
So I'll answer that. I'm just the applicant as Dilpreet. So we are proposing a above grade side entrance on the side which goes directly into the staircase. The portion when you enter the staircase is all going to be fire rated. That meets building code, which directly goes downstairs to the basement, which is also going to be a shared common for entrance. So the whole portion underneath that goes to the basement will also be fire rated, and then that will give direct access to the basement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Madam Clerk, are there any public members signed on for this one?
No, Your Worship, not for this meeting.
Okay. Steve, just a question in terms, I guess, in terms of procedural fairness more than anything else. We do have another application that had a similar component to this, albeit was slightly more involved in this one, that has been deferred a couple of times pending tonight's allocation report. And because the Committee of Adjustment obviously precedes our council meeting, council hasn't yet had an opportunity to see that allocation report or discuss it. Is there any issue in deferring this one until our next meeting, until council actually does have an opportunity to decide what we're going to do in terms of that allocation report?
No process issue from a legislative or Planning Act standpoint. The issue would just be for the applicant. It would take an additional few weeks. I guess the next meeting's in 2 weeks, so it would be essentially a 2-week additional time frame to the process for a decision to be rendered.
Okay. Thoughts from the committee on that? I mean, just in my mind, it hardly seems fair that we've made the other folks wait until we have an opportunity to discuss this report, and then if we were to approve this tonight prior to doing so, it's perhaps a bit of a double standard. Member Bonato.
Sorry, member Bingham was before me.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Sorry, Member Spigen.
That's okay. Thank you, Member Bonato. Yeah, actually, you vocalized exactly my thoughts in regards to the previous application that we just had. I don't think it would be fair for us to have deferred that one and not the same in this one. So I'm of the same frame of mind.
Okay. Member Bonato.
was wondering, because we are discussing the report tonight and we have deferred the other one quite a bit. And I think we sort of deferred it that we were going to make up our minds tonight on that issue so that they didn't have to continue waiting, because I think there's some issues of cost to them as well. So I'm wondering if these people want to wait to our council meeting and we can maybe make a decision later on in our council meeting, depending on what our engineers bring forward in the report. Because I feel it's really unfair to keep, is it Tracy Smith, the other applicant? Steve?
No, that was Jennifer Smith.
Jennifer Smith, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of them anyway, I remember the Smith name, and sorry, I couldn't remember the first part. But I know that we deferred it almost a couple of times already. And I am wondering if it's really becoming unfair to them, because I did note in one of the meetings that they have, part of it is on their mortgage payments and the cost of the house itself, to keep waiting. So anyway, it's just a thought on my part.
Steve, I understand that you've spoken with Ms. Smith and that matter's coming back on June 14th.
That's correct. So that bylaw isn't on the agenda tonight.
So the Smith application is going to be decided on the 14th, and the applicant's aware of that, knows that. And I think that the issue with bringing this particular application up later on tonight is that, you know, we'll adjourn the committee of adjustment meeting, commence council, and, you know, then basically we'd have to reconvene committee of adjustment, I guess, right, Steve or Jennifer?
Okay.
Yes.
Thoughts from anybody else on that? Member Wagner?
Yes, thank you very much. So I guess, yes, with that said, then maybe we address both of these at the June 14th meeting. And then that way we can get them both handled after we have our report. Just my thought.
I personally think that's the fairest route for everybody concerned. Board Member Buffett?
You're muted.
Yeah, I was just basically going to reiterate what Councillor Wagner just said too, that it would be fair to everybody to treat them all equally by dealing with it all under one date after we've had a chance to absorb the report tonight and discuss it.
Okay. Sounds like we're approaching consensus on that then. Can I get a mover and seconder then for a deferral? Member Wagner, seconded by Member Fegan. Okay, so the resolution will read, after considering the application, the committee requires additional information to determine whether the request is minor in nature, in keeping with the intent of the official plan and zoning bylaw, and desirable for the appropriate development of the land. Accordingly, the committee resolves to defer the application. Can I include in that resolution until the June 14th meeting? Okay. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? That's carried. Okay. All right, so second application, Steve?
Yeah, I just have a few slides on that one, and I'll just share the screen for the overview of the next application. And for this application, Debbie and Bruce are both here as well. Should there be any questions from the committee for either the owner or their consultants. So this application was filed by Glenn Schnarr and Associates for the Fieldgate property. Fieldgate has registered the ownership as Shelburne 89 Developments Limited for the draft plan of subdivision located northeast of Highway 89 and County Road 124 that's currently being serviced. So you'll be familiar with this plan. It was last at council, I believe, for the pre-servicing agreement in the fall and previously in September for some minor red line revisions. The block that is subject to the current variance application is outlined in red here, and colored purple. So block 216 is proposed via site plan approval for a retail commercial development. This is a bit hard to see, but you've seen another version of the site plan back in September for this site plan development. So the commercial buildings include 3 total buildings. The first is primarily a food store as the main anchor tenant in the north part of the property, and then several other smaller units to the east of that. 2 smaller outbuildings with a mix of a restaurant in the southeast corner, and in the west, 5 commercial units for restaurant, retail, and other commercial uses. Parking primarily in the middle and between the 2 buildings at the south end of the property, some landscaping along the highway. And you can see there are a total of 4 driveways proposed, 2 on Ojibwe Road on the east side of the site and 2 at Potawatomi Crescent at the north end of the site. There is no direct access from Highway 89. That's an MTO requirement. So the variance is really for 3 things. The first thing is the designation of the front lot line of the development, and maybe to illustrate that, I'll just skip back to this. So the zoning bylaw definition of the front lot line of the property is based on both the width and the type of street that the property fronts on. You can see block 216 fronts on Highway 89, Street B and Street C. Purpose of the variance is to designate Highway 89 as the frontage so that some loading spaces which will be enclosed can be located in the rear yard without any zoning issues. That's really just a matter of clarification. Of course, from a design and policy perspective, the entire development should be oriented to primarily to streets B and Highway 89 Main Street to ensure that there's good visibility to the fronts of the stores, to the parking, and that it's a welcoming design. The second variance is for a small reduction in the rear yard. So one of the concerns through the processing of the site plan application was there was an unenclosed open loading dock for the grocery store, for the future food store, to the north of the building, and across would be some townhomes. So the front of the townhomes would be up here. The applicant has revised their plan to fully enclose the loading space, so the truck will enter into the building, and that will contain some of the noise and activity and loading and unloading within the building to minimize noise and other issues. And there will be a bit of a berm and acoustic fence to help screen some of the other areas of loading and waste containment and pickup on the back of the site here. So as a result of enclosing that loading space, the rear yard, because the lot line kind of dips in at the north end, is a little bit shy of the 7.5 meters and is 5 meters really just at that specific point. And so that's a reduction of 2.5 meters. Other parts of the rear yard are larger than the 7.5 or meet the 7.5. So a pretty minor little change there, and for good reason to enclose the loading space. The third variance is for 3 of the 4 driveways. So the widest driveway proposed is actually down at the south end of the development, which would be a right in, right out. And the maximum driveway width in the zoning bylaw measured along the property line is 9 meters. A wider driveway is proposed to accommodate the necessary fire route and vehicle turning movements in this location. And then similarly, the 2 other driveways, the second one to the north and the easterly driveway along the Potawatomi Crescent entrance would be wider to account for the required truck and vehicle movements at those full move driveways. So not to get too much into the details of that, but the applicant has provided some justification for those wider driveways by illustrating the turning movements. In this case, so the blue is the swept path of the turning movements of a full-size tractor trailer, which is the type of delivery vehicle that can be expected for the food store. And as you can see, in order to come into the site and to exit the site at the driveway for the loading space, there is additional width required to accommodate that. And then without going through all these in detail, they've done the same analysis for smaller delivery trucks to the other buildings, as well as for waste vehicles, snow removal vehicles, and the fire vehicles, to demonstrate that there is some need for a wider driveway. So what this is really ultimately pointed to is that the zoning bylaw standard or maximum driveway width is really too narrow for this style of commercial development, which relies on some of these larger vehicles. And we've seen that also in other commercial developments. For example, the No Frills across the street has wider driveways to accommodate some of these vehicle movements. So maybe I'll just stop sharing the presentation there. We have evaluated the minor variance request under the 4 tests under the Planning Act, and the applicant has provided a planning opinion as well, recommending approval. We have recommended a condition of approval, whereby if the MTO requires a different driveway width than what the variance would permit, that ultimately is a matter of their jurisdiction within a certain distance of the highway. So really deferring to MTO. There's no signs of that so far, but we are awaiting one last round of comments from the MTO on the site plan. And just on that note, I know this is not a committee of adjustment matter, but council will see later in the agenda that this site plan is not on the agenda tonight. That was intentional because there is a bit of time needed still to contemplate some further changes that Fieldgate is working on the site plan, and to make sure that the site plan agreement is fully detailed and ready for council consideration. So we do expect that that application will come back for council consideration on June 14th, just to give you an update on the status of the site plan review. So things are moving along, and the applicant is gearing up to begin some site work on the commercial site so that they can get the first and foremost, the future food land started. So I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from committee members? No? Okay, any questions from, oh, sorry, Board Member Donato?
So Steve, we're deferring this, waiting for MTO comments.
No.
No, sorry, we've recommended a condition just to say that if MTO comes back with some additional comments and for some reason they say one of the driveways has to be slightly different than shown in the drawings, that whatever MTO requires would be the standard for that driveway. Just to make it clear that they wouldn't have to come back for a further variance if it's somewhat different than what the committee considers.
Thank you.
Any questions from the public?
There are no public members registered.
All right. From the committee, recommendation is to approve it with conditions. Board Member Wagner.
Just, yeah, just a quick note to say that I actually love the idea that the driveways are a little larger. We all know what the Tim Hortons parking lot is like over there. So I love this. This is fantastic. I've always said that bigger is better for getting in and out. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so with that, can I note you as the mover? Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Buffett. Okay, so moved by Member Wagner, seconded by Member Buffett. After considering the application, the committee is satisfied that the request is desirable for the appropriate and continued use of the subject property, maintains the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw and official plan, and is minor in nature. Accordingly, the committee resolves to grant the request. The minor variance is granted in accordance with the minor variance sketch provided to the committee and an approved site plan, and subject to the condition that all driveways shall be in accordance with MTO requirements where applicable. All in favor? It's carried. Okay. Anything else, Steve, for Committee of Adjustment?
Nope, that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Excellent. Can I get a motion to adjourn Committee of Adjustment? Buffett, seconded by Hall. All in favor? Carried. Okay. All right, so we will call the regular council meeting to order. And to begin, I would ask that if you're able, you stand for the playing of the national anthem. Thank you. We would also like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. Now, before we jump into tonight's agenda and with council's indulgence, I'd like to make a few comments. A recent discovery of the body of 215 children in an unmarked grave on the site of the Kamloops Residential School has horrified Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and rightfully so. This discovery has been a stark and stinging reminder of the shameful legacy of residential schools in our country. To be sure, this is a legacy which leaves deeply marring scars in the character of this nation. It is also a legacy that some may find tempting to try to ignore or to hide from, but we can't let that happen. We have to acknowledge fully what happened to these children, the families from which they were torn, and to the many others who survived residential schools, but who were left deeply traumatized and injured by their experiences. It is only through that full acknowledgement, by owning up to this as a real, albeit tragic and shameful part of our nation's past, that we can ever hope to move forward. And as we move forward, we cannot only be focused on healing the wounds of the past, but we must also address the real and immediate issues that continue to plague our Indigenous communities across this country today. To honor the lives and the spirits of those 215 children and others who we may not know about, we have lowered our flags at Town Hall to half-mast. On behalf of Council and the residents of the town of Shelburne, I want to extend our deepest collective condolences to all of those who are directly or indirectly affected by this. I also want to make clear to members of our Indigenous community, both locally and across our country, that the town of Shelburne grieves with you and we stand with you. I would ask that we all observe a moment of quiet reflection. Thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest tonight from any member of council? No? Okay. If not, then can I get a mover and seconder to receive the minutes from the May 10th council meeting? Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Hull. Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor? Carried. Were there any questions submitted, Madam Clerk, for question period?
No, Your Worship, there's no questions for this evening.
Okay. So we have two proclamations tonight. The first is to declare June 2021 as Pride Month in the town of Shelburne. So the official proclamation reads as follows. Whereas every year, cities all around the world celebrate the diversity that strengthens our town to commemorate and support sexual and gender minorities' liberation. And whereas Pride Month is a positive stance against discrimination and violence towards lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people to promote their self-affirmation, dignity, equality rights, increase their visibility as a social group, build community, and celebrate sexual diversity and gender variance. And whereas the rainbow flag is the most recognized LGBTQ symbol designed in 1978, and whereas Pride Month in Shelburne is an opportunity to prevent discrimination and promote awareness and acceptance of every human person and to promote the development of harmonious relationships amongst all members of the community. And whereas we support an inclusive and respectful community where all citizens can live, work, and play in a safe and secure environment. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Wade Mills, do hereby proclaim June 2021 as Pride Month in the town of Shelburne. So the Pride flag, Jennifer, is going up.
It'll be going up tomorrow.
Okay, excellent. And the second proclamation is for ALS Awareness Month. And I'd like to thank Councillor Fegan for bringing this to our attention. Whereas ALS is a rapidly fatal motor neuron disease for which there is no known cure or cure for. And whereas over 2,500 Canadians at any given time are living with ALS. And whereas ALS is known as Lou Gehrig's disease, it can strike anyone regardless of age, gender, or circumstances. And whereas recent advances in ALS research have produced promising leads, and we must continue this crucial work. And whereas the ALS Society of Canada is dedicated to providing direct support to ALS patients, along with their families and caregivers, to ensure the best quality of life possible while living with ALS. Now, therefore, I, Wade Mills, Mayor of the Corporation of the Town of Shelburne, do hereby proclaim June 2021 as ALS Awareness Month in the Town of Shelburne. So thank you, Councillor Fegan, for bringing that to our attention. I know that that has a close personal meaning to you and your family, so thank you. Okay, so next up we have our audit report from our friends at BDO. I think Angela and Tracy. Hi guys, how are you doing?
Hello. Good, how are you?
Good, good. Who's going to lead off?
I can lead off. I'd like to thank the council for inviting us to your virtual meeting tonight. So I'm Tracy Smith and I'm a partner with BDO. Also attending the meeting from BDO is Angela Nickel, the senior manager who worked closely with your management team during the audit. We would like to thank Carrie and Marion and their team for their assistance they provided to us during the audit. The audit was performed virtually, so there are some unique challenges trying to obtain sufficient evidence electronically, and we really appreciate their patience as we work through that and as they helped us around those obstacles. So thank you to Carrie and Marion and the team. I'll present a short high-level overview of the auditor's report and portions of the draft financial statements. The presentation starts on page 20 of the council agenda. A full copy of the financial statements has been provided in your council agenda on page 48. The statements are in draft and need to be approved by council before they can be released in final. Angela will then present some highlights of the municipality's performance using some graphical analysis, and she will also summarize the auditor's communication to the council. Since we are having to use virtual technology, we will answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Management is responsible for preparing the financial statements. It's our responsibility as your auditor to give an opinion on the financial statements prepared by management. An audit opinion is the highest level of assurance we can provide as public accountants, and we did obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to provide an unqualified opinion. Our opinion is in the second paragraph, and in our opinion, the financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards, which means we did not find any issues during the audit, and we give a clean opinion. The audit report then goes on in significant detail about the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance. And on the final page of the audit report, it clarifies the responsibilities of the auditor. So if approved by council, the report will be finalized and dated for today. The financial statements are prepared on a consolidated basis. Therefore, 100% of the assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenses are included for the Shelburne Public Library, Shelburne Business Improvement Area, the Center Dufferin Recreation Complex, and the financial statements also include Shelburne's 53.35% share of the Shelburne Fire Department. Separate review engagement reports have been prepared for the library, the fire department, and Center Dufferin Recreation, and a notice to reader report was prepared for the BIA. The statement of financial position, or the balance sheet, is at a point in time at December 31st, 2020. The assets increase in cash of 4.9 million was a direct result of an increase in reserves of 1.1 million and obligatory reserves of 3.5 million. The obligatory reserves are development charges and gas tax funds, and they are only recognized as revenue when you spend when the amounts are spent. So they do show up on the balance sheet as liabilities. So you'll see the unspent portion increased to 9.9 million from 6.4 million. So the extra unspent portion of those development charges are still sitting in cash. For the liabilities, significant liabilities are the deferred revenue that we've just discussed. Other significant liability is the external debt, of which 435,000 was paid off, leaving a balance owing of 4.4 million. Net financial assets is a key financial indicator and is the total of the assets less the liabilities. Positive means you have resources for the future. Net financial assets will increase when your reserves are increasing and when you're paying off your debt. The non-financial assets include your physical, tangible capital assets, the roads, the buildings, equipment, the water and sewer systems. They are reported at cost less amortization, which is an estimate of the use over time. So it's important to note that that's not replacement cost. That is the historical cost. The amount to replace those assets would be significantly more than they're carried on your balance sheet. The net increase in tangible capital assets reflects additions of 7.6 million, which includes a substantial addition, 6.1 million in contributed assets relating to the Summerhill subdivision, less amortization of 2.4 million. The accumulated surplus is the equity of the town and includes both your monetary and your physical assets for a total of $78.5 million. The statement of operations and accumulated surplus reports all the transactions during the year. It is consolidated, as we said before, with the library, the DIA, the rec complex, and your share of the fire. Revenues total 20.5 million, include taxes, user fees for various services, grants, and other revenue. Included in revenue are all your external sources for revenue for both operating and capital purposes. It does not include any transfers from reserves. The most significant change is in your other revenues, and that relates to the contributed assets of $6.1 million for the subdivision. The grants decreased because of a large modernization grant you received in 2019, and less gas tax funds were spent during 2020. The budget amount for grants is higher than the actual amount because one of your significant capital projects relating to a well did not proceed, and there was 1.2 million budgeted for that grant. The expenses include all your operating costs, such as payroll, supplies, services, interest, and is presented by function. For example, environmental services would include your water and your sewer. The expenses also include amortization, which is the estimate of the wear and tear on the physical assets from their use. The actual expenses do not include actual capital purchases, nor do the expenses include transfers to reserves. The budgeted amount has been adjusted to include the amortization so that you can compare the budget to the actual amounts. Total revenue less total expenses for the year is the annual surplus of 6.7 million. It's important to note that that annual surplus is not your operating surplus, so it's not the amount that can be used in the future for your budget. The actual operating surplus for the year was 428,544, and that was transferred to reserve approved by council. The general surplus that you see on this page is actually the amount raised during the year from external sources after paying your operating costs and covering your amortization. So it looks very high this year because of the contributed capital assets that show up in your other revenue, but the capital asset expense part of that doesn't show on this statement. So from this annual surplus of 6.7, you need to pay for your capital assets and make your debt payments. So if we go to the next statement, the statement of changes in net financial assets takes that annual surplus, that 6.7 million annual surplus, and adds back the amortization and deducts the actual capital assets that were spent or received during the year. So during the year, 7.6 million in capital assets were acquired, which includes that 6.1 million in contributed assets. This statement then comes down to your increase in net financial assets. So this can either be positive or negative. Positive doesn't necessarily mean it's good, and a negative doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It really depends on where the town is in their capital asset plan and whether you've budgeted to take funds from your reserves to buy capital assets, or whether you're actually building up your reserves to buy capital assets in the future. So in 2020, you budgeted to have a negative amount, which means you were going to take money from your reserves. The actual was positive 1.5, which means some of your capital projects did not proceed. So you didn't have to take the money from the reserves, and you also had an operating surplus during the year. So 4.3 million was budgeted for capital assets, and if you back out the 6.1 from the 7.6 that shows on the statement, your actual capital was spent was 1.5. So You budgeted for 4.3 in capital asset spending, and you only spent 1.5 million. So you didn't take the money, you didn't need to take some money out of reserves. The last statement shows the activity in the cash and cash equivalents for the year. So cash from operations was approximately 6.8 million. And a significant portion of that is the 3.1 million that you collected in development charges that have not yet been spent. So that increased your cash balance. You spent 1.5 in actual capital assets, and you paid down 435,000 of your long-term liabilities. So an overall increase in cash of $4.9 million. Note 9, which is on page 67 of the agenda package, is the accumulated surplus note. And this provides details of where the accumulated surplus balances are invested. So it breaks down that 78.5 million on the bottom of your balance sheet. This is the only place where you would see that operating surplus or deficit. But as I said earlier, the town did have an operating surplus of 428,000, which was transferred to reserve. So it's included in your reserve balance of $12.6 million. Net invested in capital assets of 66.8 million is the amount that the municipality has invested in capital assets over the years, less the amount still owing on the debt used to finance those capital assets. The unfunded solid waste closure and post-closure costs are estimates of future costs and will be funded on an annual basis as those actual costs are incurred. And the same goes for the unfunded post-employment benefits, which is future costs based on actuarial valuations. And again, that's funded on an annual basis as the actual costs are incurred. So I'm going to now turn it over to Angela to provide some more details and financial highlights as she looks at the numbers in a more graphical format.
So this first chart is your long-term debt for the past 5 years. So you can see in 2016, you had a significant increase due to the additional 2 loans that were entered into in 2016. And from then on, you've been slowly repaying your principal repayments and your debt has decreased. The next chart is your reserves and your discretionary reserve funds. So you can see that they've been steadily building for the past 5 years. Mainly in kind of water and sewer. So this chart is your obligatory reserve funds. And again, you would have seen so 2016 and 2017 are pretty consistent for those 2 years. 2018, you saw a small drop, and that was due to development charges that would have funded some of your capital purchases. And then from in 2019 and 2020, you've seen a significant increase relating to your unspent development charges from the new subdivisions as you start collecting them. So this compares your sources of revenue. So 2016 at the top and 2020 at the bottom. And the sources of revenue are pretty consistent between the 2016 and 2020. There has been growth in the overall revenue base. You can see that grants have decreased from 14% in 2016 to only 6% in 2020. And as a result, you've seen an increase in other income of 36% this year. It was only 27% in 2016. And that's mainly due to results of your contributed assets this year. Your next slide is breaking down your operating grants for the past 5 years. So you have seen a decrease in the OMPF grant every single year for the past 5 years. And you received a one-time modernization grant in 2019, resulting in that large spike last year. But otherwise, your operating grants have been pretty steady over the past 5 years. So your capital grants, so other than 2016, when you were building a few large capital projects, they have been steadily decreasing every single year, meaning that you have to fund your capital asset projects through other means. So long-term debt, development charges, gas tax funding, taxation. And on the flip side, so this is your capital expenditures. So you would see you had really large, significant grant funding in 2016. You also had a significant capital expenditures in 2016 as well. And the last 4 years have been $2 million or less, kind of consistently on that basis. So this looks at the expense piece. So you can see in 2020 that your most significant cost to the municipality is the police with 29, almost 30% of the total expenses. Water and sewer is the next largest cost for the municipality at 21.67%, followed by roads at 13% and general government at 11%. So similar to the revenue, so this is the expenses broken down per type. So 2016 at the top and 2020 at the bottom. And you can see that the type of expenses really haven't changed significantly between these 2 years. So this gives you a kind of picture for the last 5 years. So you can see that right now you have been using some of your cash that's sitting in your operating accounts. That are sitting kind of either reserved for reserves or your reserve funds, and you've been using those for operating pretty consistently for the past 5 years, kind of funding your operations as kind of, just funding your operations. Your reserve fund account has increased significantly directly as a result of your development charges in the last couple of years that you have collected and not spent. As well, you've seen an increase significantly in your reserves and discretionary reserve funds for the past 5 years. So the final letter to council, which is included in your package, contains all of the required communications in accordance with the Canadian auditing standards. The communication would look very, very similar to last year, as the required communications are defined by those standards and need to be reported on an annual basis. So the status of the audit, so the financial statements are in draft format in the package and will require council's approval before they can be released in final. So once approved by council, we will need to obtain a signed representation letter from management and also perform the subsequent events procedures up to the date of the approval. So independence, we are confirming that we are independent from the town, and so we can issue our independent auditor's report. So materiality, so the amounts that are material to the town, if they would affect the decisions the decisions of the users that are relying on the financial statements. So the materiality for the 2020 audit was $340,000, and this remained unchanged from our planning report. So there were no changes in the planned procedures, and there was no issues that were identified in our testing performed. No additional risk areas were identified during our audit. The significant accounting estimates, I'm going to include post-employment benefits, taxation revenue estimate, and the liability for contaminated sites, and these remain unchanged from the prior year. We are required to report in writing any significant deficiencies in internal controls that were identified during the audit. We did not identify any internal control deficiencies that were tested during the audit. We would like to thank council for having us here this evening and would be happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to stop the share so that it is easier to see everyone.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for Tracy or Angela? Nothing? Carrie, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
I would just like to say thank you for working with us again and being so accommodating. And as you say, it was an interesting audit trying to do it remotely, and we learned a lot, and we're ready for 2021.
All right,
Hopefully we're in person by then.
Hopefully.
let's hope so. Okay, well, if there's no questions then, can I get a mover and seconder to receive and approve the 2020 financial statements from BDO as presented? Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? It's carried. All right. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
See you next year. Okay, so next up is planning public meeting. So tonight's public meeting under section 34 of the Planning Act is to consider an application for zoning bylaw amendment for the lands known municipally as 242 Main Street East. The purpose and effect of the amendment is to rezone the property from mixed use commercial, which is C2 zone, to a new site-specific mixed-use commercial exception. I will ask the clerk to provide the method of notice for tonight's public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources as of May 13th, 2021. Notice has been posted on the town's website, and notice was provided to property owners within a 120-meter radius of the subject property.
Okay, thank you. So we will have a presentation from Steve Weaver, the town's planner, following which there'll be a chance for questions from the public as well as members of council. The clerk will also submit written submission, or sorry, will accept written submissions, and all submissions, whether written or oral, will be given consideration by council before any final decision is made. So Steve, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I'll be brief with this presentation as all the details are captured in my report in your agenda package. The applicant, Mr. Jason Higgins, is here this evening as well, if there's any questions regarding the proposal. So the subject property is at 242 Main Street East. This is in closer to the downtown, west of James Street on the north side of Main Street. You can see the property has access from the front at Main Street, as well as the rear lane at the back of the property between William and James Street. There is a driveway that continues straight through the west side of the property, providing access. The building that's subject to the application is not the main dwelling at the front, but rather the existing accessory detached garage at the back on the rear lane. So these are some pictures. They're both from Google Street View. The most recent picture that we have from online sources is from 2018. You can see the front of the existing dwelling from Main Street, and it's 2.5 story. The existing detached garage is shown in the lower right image. Google did not travel down the lanes for some time, so it was back in 2009 when they took this picture. I don't believe the building has changed significantly since then, but you can see it's a second story above, and that's the proposed the area of the building that's subject to the proposed renovation. Essentially, that second story would be removed and rebuilt on the current first story of the detached garage, just to ensure that the entire proposed dwelling unit on that second story will fully comply with the building code, have proper HVAC with separation from the garage HVAC, and fire separation and plumbing, electrical, all of those things. So there are really 6 provisions that are proposed with this rezoning application. A rezoning application was recommended rather than a variance, given the number of unique provisions required to both recognize the existing situation with the detached building as well as what's proposed in the second level of that building. So increased coverage. This is not a result of any changes to the building, just recognizing the fact that that existing detached garage, which has been there since well before the zoning bylaw was put in place, will in fact exceed the coverage by 1.2%. So the max coverage is normally 10%. The footprint is slightly larger than otherwise permitted by the zoning bylaw. The maximum height slightly higher, and the minimum setback to the lane would be 0.6 meters. Again, that's the existing location. The main purpose, though, for the rezoning application, the site-specific rezoning, is to permit 2 dwelling units on the lot, with one of them being on the second story of the detached accessory building through renovation of that second story of that building. So this chart is in our report. It just summarizes and compares what the zoning bylaw normally requires for a detached. If there was no detached garage building on the property and one were to be built, these are the standards it would be required to meet. But recognizing the condition of the existing garage, that's where there's some differences in the height, the size, the setbacks, and with the proposal that there would be a second dwelling unit on the property in that existing accessory building. So this is the floor plan of the provided by the applicant of the proposed upper story of that building. You can see it's got several rooms, a kitchen, bedroom, and living space, as well as some windows, sliding door, and a deck. This is at the south side, so towards Main Street, I believe. And then finally, we have a survey, again, just illustrating the location of the existing garage at the back of the property. This part of the building is shown on the survey, but was actually not constructed. And the existing driveway, there is ample parking provided on the property with this long through driveway. Lots of cars can be parked along there. As well, there's, I think you saw in one of the earlier images, there's a roll-up door at the main level of the garage where a vehicle can be parked as well. Servicing to the building can be provided via the existing water service to the property. And there has been some review by Jim and Rob to review the sanitary service. And based on the initial review, it appears that the new building or the new dwelling unit can be connected to the existing sanitary service lateral on the property that comes in from the rear lane at the back. So we circulated the application, and all the comments that we received back are attached to our report. There are no objections and no public submissions have been received. The drawings provided by the applicant are also attached to my report, illustrating some of the elevation views of the building in addition to the additional floor plans provided. And we've referenced in our report and our recommendation the concern about having not considered the report that's next on the agenda, which is Jim's report on servicing allocation, and consideration of that report prior to approval of this bylaw, just to ensure that there is a servicing reserve set up for this stage 1 area of town for these types of infill developments before decisions are made. Now, I know there's already been discussion by the Committee of Adjustment about whether to make those kinds of decisions at this meeting or defer to June 14th. The applicant may have some comments to offer on that regarding his plans. As I know, the purpose of the unit, as indicated by Mr. Higgins, has been to accommodate some in-laws who are in need of a place to move to. So it does have a bit of a timing impact, and just wanted to make council aware that this one was a bit time sensitive for the applicant. So with that, I'll pause, and happy to take any questions from council. Thank you.
Okay, questions for Steve? Jennifer?
I just wanted to note that I had a late email arrive today from a resident at 221 First Avenue East. And the question was, will there be any grading done to this property? And if so, how will that affect the properties around it, including mine, which is directly behind it?
Any grading?
Yes.
Steve?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that, Jennifer. You did forward that email to me and I forgot to address it through the presentation. So my understanding is there will not be any grading. However, Mr. Higgins may be able to elaborate on that.
Yeah, there's no planned grading. It's all the construction is on the top. The only work to the ground is we have to put frost protection around the base of the structure, but there's no grading being done.
Thank you.
Last chance for questions from council. Councilor Bernardo?
I got a question more for council because I understand this is time sensitive, but I got the feeling when I heard in the Committee of Adjustment and we decided to wait on that one, that the first one was time sensitive there because they had a somewhat similar situation with a family that wanted to live there. So the question in my mind for council is, how do we make a decision until we get the report?
Good question. Steve?
So the only difference with this one is that, I mean, although the report is on your agenda now, you don't have to deal with the bylaw. You could deal with the bylaw later in the agenda as council. Or if it's council's will to be consistent with the others, defer to the 14th. Those are the options available to you.
So Jennifer, procedurally, we can defer consideration of this bylaw until later in the meeting?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So Mr. Higgins, what sort of timing are you looking at for this project if it were to go ahead?
So the bigger with ours, because it's outdoor construction, we have to basically have everything done by like October-ish before it gets too cold. And as well, our in-laws have somewhere to stay for the summer, but they don't have anywhere to stay after October because they can stay at their seasonal campground at their trailer for the season, but then they need to move into the residence. We've already basically, we're hoping to get construction started by mid-July. And with what we were explained to by Steve is if you guys decided, if council's will was to decide to approve tonight, then there would be a period where you have the time to release it, which is, I think I was told 10 or 14 days. And then there's the 20 days appeal process. And then we still have to apply for building permits. So we're already, if it was approved tonight, we're already up into the middle of July before construction.
Steve, do you want to clarify?
Any delays would put us in.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we can, if there's a decision made either tonight or at the June 14th meeting, the town has 15 days, so a little over 2 weeks to get the notice of that decision out. Now we can get it out right away, essentially the next day. But then there's a 20-day appeal period. So minimum, there's 21 days after the date of decision. So if the decision were made tonight, it's 3 weeks from now before that appeal period would be over and a building permit could be considered. If it's June 14th, 20 days from that is into the first week of July.
Okay.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
building permits upwards of 10 days after, and we can't sorry, the building permit, we can't apply for it until after the appeal process. So, and that's up to 10 days or more to get the permit approved by the region. Or the county, sorry, Dufferin County.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, what do you want to do? Any thoughts? Councilor Buffett?
Just a question. If, let's say, worst case scenario, we delayed it till the next meeting, would that still give you enough time to get it completed before the fall?
I don't know. That's an extra 14 days. So that's 14 days of prime construction season, right? Where they're able to operate without as much of the rain and the stuff that's going to come in the fall, in September, October, when the weather shifts. Because they have to remove the whole upper structure of the building, so the whole lower part is completely exposed through the summer. They're bringing in trusses and redoing the whole upper floor. So the roof trusses, the walls, everything has to be completely redone in order to meet building codes.
Okay.
You still have to do the demolition of the building, that current parts that are there, the upper part. They don't need a permit to do that. Demolition.
Sure.
Jennifer, you were nodding there. Is a demolition permit required?
That's correct, yes.
But they apply to the county for that, or to
That's
us.
correct, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we would still have to wait 21 days before doing so, though.
Well, I'm confused. Why do you have to wait 21 days to demolish something?
Because they're not going to demolish it unless it's passed through the appeals process. It's not finalized until the appeal process is over.
They don't want to tear it down unless they know they can rebuild it the way they want to. Okay, well, I mean, if we can procedurally consider this later in the agenda after we consider the next report, I'm fine with that. If anybody has any objection to that. Okay, not seeing any. Okay, so Madam Clerk, if you could just remind me as we do the rest of the agenda in case I forget.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Anything else, Steve?
No, I don't believe there are any members of the public in attendance either. So I think that concludes that public meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, on to council inquiries. I have a couple, but defer to the rest of the group. Councilor Bernardo.
I have to go back to my notes. I know schools supposedly going back into session, or they're considering sending the children back to school.
We're might be good now. I pushed.
But
Defer it 2 weeks.
mine inquiries on signage. I know we put signs up at Old Village Lane and Park, but those same kids or children cross at Park and Robert to get to the entrance, Glenbrook at the back entrance there. And there's a lot of vehicles sometimes that go up and down and turn at Robert and Park, to Robert, and proceed to Greenwood. So I'm wondering if we can put some of those signs up there that children crossing, or school crossing, whatever it is, similar to the ones we put up at Old Village and Park.
We did put some at Park and Robert.
Not think so. They're at Old Village. They're further up, I thought. I know there's some along for Old Village where they cross there to go along Old Village Court to enter the entrance at Park and Old Village.
Denise?
I'm just gonna, through your Through the mayor, address Councillor Bonato's first comment. I mean, as staff, we're not aware of schools returning in this calendar year through the pandemic. Our understanding is that they're going to continue with online. But that said, on the signage side, I'll just flip it over to Jim. We weren't aware of that.
Through your worship, sure, we can look at that. We did, as the mayor mentioned, we did put some additional signs on Robert, I believe that park, as well as Robert and Greenwood as well. So sorry, that location again, Councillor Bernardo?
It is Robert and Park.
Okay.
And I know you have signage more for Old Village and Park, but you can double check in that area. There's a couple of crossings that they cross at in that area.
Okay, through your worship, definitely we'll check into that.
Okay. My other inquiries on bylaws regarding signage that are on lawns that have that are close to the road. I know our sign bylaw does not allow for that, and I'm wondering if the bylaw officer will go around, because I see signage being those bag style signage just suddenly stuck on lawns by somebody going through the town that saying that they're willing to buy houses, for example. So I'm wondering if we can get our bylaw officer to go around and make sure that those signs aren't sticking there. And the final one, and I've been complaining for years, is parking. No parking signs on Old Village Road. I have people that park because the signages are on the light posts and they're quite far apart, and people don't necessarily pay attention to before they see the next light post, parking in between. So I'm wondering if we can tighten up the signage that says no parking, because people have a tendency to park on the wrong side of the road.
Through your worship, yes, that's definitely another thing we can check into there. So I'll note that.
And that's it for me.
Okay. Who's next? Councillor Fegan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, with council's indulgence, I'd actually like to bring back to the table the recommendation regarding the light up letters suggested for Jack Downing Park. When we last discussed at the last meeting, maybe I wasn't clear enough in my comments when I said that now's not the time that we should be increasing any costs. I was certainly referring to this light up sign as well, but I didn't want to railroad the other important work that has to be done at Jack Downing. So if council would permit me, I'd like to bring that back to the table to discuss.
Madam Clerk, what's the best way to deal with that?
In order to resurrect that report, you require 2/3 majority vote of council. Alternatively, it cannot be brought forward for the 6 months after the vote was passed. So to revisit that, you require 2/3 majority vote.
Right.
Would that be by a notice of motion?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So I guess, Councillor Fegan, if you want to bring a notice of motion at that point in the agenda,
sure.
And then at the next meeting, Jennifer, then at that point, we determine whether there's the 2/3 sufficient to reopen that issue?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
Jennifer will send it through by email.
Okay. Anything else? Councillor Wagner?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sure councillors have noted on Facebook the community's concerned regarding speeding. I know I've addressed this a couple of times, I believe, through council before, so I don't mean to take too much time discussing it, but of course, this is what we're here for, is to make sure that we bring community concerns forward and that we do discuss them and potentially inform the community as well as to options, even if there are options as to why we can't do those options. I guess if I could get Jennifer just to sort of screen share, I sent her a few photos that I took in Barrie. And I know that some of the community members have expressed concern as to why or why not we cannot use these specific, I guess, speed control measures. And if Jim could maybe just speak to how much these potentially could cost, if he knows that, of course, and how we maybe could fund them, and if that funding is available now, or if that would be a budget related talk for 2022, and you know, if they are feasible in the first place.
We're doing a screen share.
Oh,
apologies, I'm having some technical difficulties.
See, and I would have had the technical difficulties. That's that's why I asked Jennifer. I'm like, please share this for me. Knowing me, it would have been a disaster. I know while we're waiting, Jim could maybe also speak to the speed signs that we currently have in town. I believe we have 4 now, I think it is. You know, maybe even speak briefly as to the data that is collected and how the data is then used. Maybe the procedures or whatnot of to where these signs get placed. For example, I know when I generally try and reply to community members on Facebook, I do recommend that they send in their concerns via the form on our town's official website, so that the concerns can be noted properly and therefore used in order to distinguish whether or not the speed signs will be used in their specific location. So maybe Jim, again, you could just speak a little bit about that, so any of the members of public that are watching can understand, you know, the procedures and the protocols that are in place for such, you know, such things.
Sure. Through your worship, we do have 4 of these speed notification signs now. So we did have one in our capital projects for this year. So we did purchase that early this year and received it in early March. So we do have it out on the streets. It's actually been relocated over onto Morden Drive currently to collect data over there. So we can collect speeds. It records all speeds, time of the incidents. So you can set it for any, it'll collect data for any speed that a vehicle passes by and registers it at. It gives us the time of day with it, as well as traffic volumes, so the number of vehicles per day that travel that road. We've taken that data in the past and given that to Shelburne Police Services to use. Now we do it with the OPP. The OPP, when they took over, they actually proactively requested data from us for any of our problem areas, and they're currently reviewing that to see when the most effective time of day is. So if you know you're getting speeding at 6 p.m. when everybody's getting off work, then they can target to be in that area at that time. So we have been planning to get back to council with a report on speed measures and what we feel is most effective course to go with. And we hope to have that back to council and very shortly in the future. So.
Can't screen share by any chance, Jennifer? So basically what the pictures were, obviously, are the temporary speed bumps that I was able to view in Barrie that are used on, I guess it would be considered a side street or a residential street. And it's on the street, but then there's like 2 poles on either side, and they are able to be removed. So I know some of the community members have asked for specifically to use these. Jim, is there any reason why we cannot use them? Do you have an idea of cost, or will that be something that is included in the report?
Through worship, we did do a quick review of costing. just what we could get quickly there last week. It was actually for speed humps. They're not actually speed bumps. They're a little more graduated. So they're not quite as drastic, less chance of somebody losing control of them. They're about $1,000 each by the time you purchase them, and then they have to be signed as well because there has to be a warning that you're approaching one of but again, yes, we put that in the report to bring back to council as well. So.
Okay. I guess that's pretty much it. I'm not trying to take too much time, but I'm just trying to really make sure that the community can understand sort of our stance on this as well. Like, we know that, there's some speeding issues in town. We hear you, and we are trying to address it as best we can. The only other thing I would say with regards to Councillor Bonato's comment with the bylaw going around and collecting signs, I have seen some signs recently that are actually stating slow down. So I know that we have the bylaw sign. So is there any way that maybe the bylaw officer could approach the homes of those who have the slow down signs and just get them to put them on their lawn as opposed to removing them entirely?
Jennifer?
Yes.
Thank you. Because I'm pretty sure that those signs kind of help, right? Or at least hopefully. Yeah, I think that's it for me. So thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, there's a bunch of hands coming up here. I'm not sure if they're related to Councillor Wagner's comment or not. Councillor Hall, was it a question about? Okay.
Yeah, it's related to the speed bumps. Obviously, with my work experience, we have them at my place of work. However, the largest concern is motorcycles and bicycles cannot go through them. So it's extremely important that gets taken into account when you look at how you're using them. We've actually had 4 incidents of motorcycles being dumped over as they try to cross over those bumps.
Okay. Denise, saw your hand as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Boyles. I just wanted to note as well that certainly when we're made aware of speeding issues, and that's why it's so critical, as Councillor Wagner stated, that we are communicated with by the public. We certainly are advising the OPP, who will then take additional action where necessary. They did issue a notification not that long ago, advising the community to not speed directly. And certainly when we have areas that are identified by community members, they certainly can set up patrols and monitoring in a very tactical way. So it's again, speeding is, there are deterrents, but many times policing is one of the best deterrents.
Councillor Bonato.
Oh, I just want to respond on Lindsay's, Councillor Wagner's comment on the slow down signs. Those weren't the signs I was going after. I understand those signs. There are other signs that people are putting out that are not necessarily signs benefiting the community other than whatever purpose. So those are the ones that I don't want to see and affect our sign bylaw. And if people put them on their lawn far enough back, I don't think our sign bylaw can do anything. If it's on your property, you can do what you want, but when you're putting it on town property, it's a different story.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. This is not related to the speed bumps, humps, even though I thank Councillor Wagner for her strong advocacy on this point. And I know, Councillor Wagner, you have raised this on several occasions. I would submit that this idea is probably a lot better than the cardboard cutouts of police officers that was suggested some time ago, but I won't call any names on that, but I'll leave that alone. So I think with the humps and the bumps, I think I'm good with that. What I want to say, I want to actually take a portion of my council inquiry just to thank the mayor for coming forward with his comments and addressing the tragedy as he did. To me, it's just another example of his outstanding leadership and really putting action behind the words. So I just wanted to thank him for that. But on the same theme, as we talk about acknowledging, remembering, honoring our Indigenous community, I think it's probably a good time to insert this into the discussion, and that is the Haldeman track. Some of you may have become aware of this. This was land that was gifted or granted to the Haudenosaunee Indigenous group. They've asserted their rights over this Haldeman track. A letter was sent to Dufferin County to that respect, and they are now considering putting together a team to respond to this group as to what the steps should be taken moving forward. And why do I bring that up now is because the county has confirmed that portions, at least from what I understand, portions of the west side of Shelburne are included in this track. And so it does beg the question, and what I wanted to find out by way of a council inquiry, maybe this is more so directed to Steve, is I think it would be helpful for us to know what portions of Shelburne are, if it is the west side, are included in the Haldeman track. And then after that, what steps, if any, we decide to take once that information is confirmed in concert with the county, as they are now looking into how to go about addressing this issue. So, when we're talking about respecting our Indigenous community and expecting Indigenous rights, this is all a part of that. And so I just felt that this was a timely insert into our discussion this evening. So, Steve, I certainly don't want to put you on the spotlight, but I don't know how this could be addressed, whether this is just leaving it with staff, bringing a notice of motion. I'm not really sure, but I think if we got some confirmation, I think it would be helpful for all of us around the table.
Your worship, we can certainly, I don't have it at my fingertips, but there have been some email correspondence amongst staff about the mapping of that. And we were ourselves trying to determine what parts of Shelburne, if any, were affected by it. So I want to circle back with staff to make sure that I don't say anything out of turn about how the mapping applies or doesn't apply, or if parts of Shelburne are affected. So I think we should revisit that and then report back on any implications for Shelburne.
Perfect, thank you.
So, Deputy Mayor, just following up on that, I know this was raised during your county committee meeting last Thursday. I wasn't able to join that meeting to watch. So what was the resolution, if anything?
Yeah, so the idea was to form, in essence, a committee of, there were some suggestions of whether it should be sort of the Council of Wardens or other parties representing lower tiers, along with maybe one or two wardens and some staff, whether it's CEOs, etc. And so it was decided that it was the best idea was to come up with a committee. I think that was going to be left with staff, and I believe the warden to sort of sort out and then maybe report back to us as to what that would look like. But the consensus certainly around the table was that this needs to be addressed and that we need to, at a bare minimum, certainly it may be a provincial or a province issue to deal with as a whole, but the committee felt that it was important to at least respond to the letter that the county received, to even if it's just listening and then taking that back to the appropriate parties. That was what was decided at that meeting.
Okay. Councilor Renato.
I've been on this council for a long time, so I got a bit of knowledge. Our former CAO, going back to two CAOs, did deal with the situation of the Haldeman track that came up with Shelburne included. Shelburne is affected by way of the drainages that we have, like the Besley drain and whatnot, because while the Besley drain towards the Nottawasaga, any other drains within the area that drains the opposite way towards the Grand River, that's where the Haldeman tract comes into effect. And My understanding is we have been approached as a town about that quite a while back, and there was some discussion with them. And I don't believe that much of any of the west side of the town is in the Haldeman track area. But again, Steve can confirm it. So it's not the first time it's been brought up.
Well, if county staff is looking into this, then maybe Steve and our staff can sort of work with them and get some further clarity on that mapping then. Okay. All right. Oh, sorry, Steve.
I was just going to add that I have a upcoming Planners of Dufferin meeting, I think next week. And so I can kind of pull the group if they've taken any action on that for their respective local municipalities.
Okay, great. All right, any other inquiries? Okay, I have two. One relates to the flags being lowered at half-mast that we referred to earlier. Jennifer, do you need some direction from us as to how long that's to remain so?
Yes, I do.
So my thought was, I know a lot of other municipalities are taking the approach that will remain at half-mast for a total of 215 hours, 1 hour representing each body that was found. I think that works out to about 9 days. I'm fine with that. I think that's sort of a nice symbolic acknowledgement if everybody else is okay with that. If there's no objections, then do you need a formal resolution or is direction okay?
Direction is okay.
Okay. Okay. And then secondly, a couple of meetings ago, council provided some direction to staff asking for a report with respect to the county's SDR and those recommendations that related to joint boards of management, specifically with respect to the CDRC and the Shelburne District Fire Department. And I was just wondering from staff if we had an update on where we're at with that report.
So that would be me through the mayor. So with that direction, there was no real timelines attached to coming back, and whether correct or incorrect, my assumption would be that it would be embedded as an analysis that we would continue through our own SDR because they have significant realignments with those two initiatives. And we're currently awaiting information and a response on whether we were successful with the grant application we made under the second intake for the province's fund. We applied for a project for $70,000, of which $20,000 we would fund. So that wouldn't be initiated probably until July, with the hope of completing it by mid to late October to align with this budget. If you would like something quicker or different than a comprehensive review, a very general update could be provided at the June 14th meeting. And we'd have to do a review on whether, based on the information that we provide, whether that would be an open meeting or the provisions would require it to be in camera. I'm not really sure. If you want to provide me with a little bit more, I guess, direction on what you'd like to see sooner than later, that would be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I would like to see sort of an interim report sooner rather than later. Perhaps focused more on the financial aspects. And any thoughts from the rest of the group? Councillor Bernardo?
I agree totally with you, Your Worship, because sitting on some of these boards is really difficult right now with the fact and the way we're sitting out there with the motions that we passed. I don't enjoy sitting in a hot seat. It's not fun. And I'm almost at the point of saying the heck with going to meetings. I don't feel like I want to be there. I've got better things in my life to enjoy than someone being angry with me. So the sooner we can get something back and resolved, the happier I'll be. Otherwise, I may appoint the deputy mayor as the chair of the fire board and I'll leave.
So is the 14th doable then, Denise, for
Yeah.
it's an interim report?
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to focus on financials, let me discuss with my colleagues under which format that would be provided, because there may be some privileged information that's more appropriate to be in camera. And it'll be focused then on an analysis that looks at scenarios. And again, I just want to make sure the assumption is correct, that that would be based on a moving forward with dissolution, because that's where the financials would actually be triggered with respect to that analysis.
Yeah, that's what I would like.
Not leaving that comprehensive review to be solely and exclusively evaluated during an SDR process, which requires, as per the grant from the province, that a consultant independent third party be hired. And then we naturally would be recommending, if we were successful, that the firm Optimus, that was the firm that was hired by the county, would be a natural sole source on this, simply because they've done so much work with the initial review that the learning curve would not be something that would be needed within a firm that hadn't completed all that governance and already completed the entire council strategic priorities direction that you had originally asked for, at least with respect to third-party governance. So long-winded, sorry, way of telling you, yes, we'll bring something back to you on the 14th. And right now, I'm feeling that it's most likely going to be an in-camera discussion.
Okay, I'll leave that part to staff's discretion. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's what I'm most interested, I think, in seeing at this point. Contrary to what some of our municipal colleagues from other municipalities may believe, no decision has been made by this council as to which way we're moving. But at least for me, I think the financial component would certainly be a pivotal piece in that decision-making process. So I would like to see that sooner than later. Is everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. No more inquiries? Okay. So on to report DO 2021-03, which is the sewage allocation policy. Jim, you authored the report, but I suspect you're going to have a little help from your friends on some of the technical stuff. So, Jim, I'll turn it over to you, and then you can delegate as you need.
Through your worship, on March 22nd, staff did report to council on sewage allocation. In April, we did staff mailed out letters and forms to property owners and developers requesting information and timelines from them. A special meeting was held April 28th, and the owners of these developments presented their projects and future needs. Additionally, council had also requested that staff undertake a review of policies from other municipalities and report back on more effective management of servicing allocation, following the principles of use it or lose it regarding allocation. So at that meeting, the following allocation renewals shown in table 1 were presented. Those total renewals end up totaling out at 348 units. And that was for reallocation. Following service allocation requests not previously allocated are shown in table 2. And this will include a second phase commercial from Fieldgate for a 15,000 square foot building there as well as the other developments noted. These total out at new requests at 507 units or 1.5 hectares of industrial, commercial, and institutional. Summarized in the previous report, using the data for the sewage system, we have approximately, 79 cubic meters or 94 units available, or 2.83 hectares for industrial, commercial, and institutional. Based on reserve allocation renewal forms received and presented by the owners of these developments, the reallocation of previously allocated capacities to accommodate new servicing allocations is not supported by these owners, as they intend to use the full amount previously noted in their applications. Table 3 summarizes the remaining capacity at the sewage treatment plant and compares it with our unused capacity. Currently, that is 550 cubic meters, of which 356 cubic meters is available for new development after accounting for allocated developments that are under construction or that only require a building permit. Up the 356 cubic meters of remaining capacity, 277 cubic meters has been allocated for 3 residential developments. All 3 owners of these developments are seeking renewal of their allocations for the 277 cubic meters. This again just reconfirms that we have a remaining capacity of 79 cubic meters of unallocated capacity. So this gives us a net shortfall of 420 cubic meters per day. So that is 78% of the 356 cubic meters remaining for capacity for residential units, and would leave 22% or 79 cubic meters a day available for new development, including ICI, to promote balanced growth and based on available servicing of lands and historic water usages. Approximately 18 to 20% of the remaining capacity should be considered to establish a reserve for planned ICI development. Currently, developments are in process and proposed within the stage 2 areas. Fieldgate at 0.74 hectares or 24 cubic meters per day. Stella Jones at 0.62 hectares or 17 cubic meters per day. And institutional, so Highland Heights Elementary with their expansion at 10 cubic meters per day for a total of 51 cubic meters. There are a small number of infill and intensification applications in process, as mentioned earlier, Committee of Adjustment, that are individually have a very minor impact, but cumulatively they do add up. The official plan supports intensification within stage 1 and 2 built up areas. However, there is insufficient unallocated capacity remaining to fully service all the planned and proposed developments and intensifications potential in stage 1 and 2 areas. So to promote compatible forms of infill, intensification, and mixed use developments within existing built up areas where services are available, a servicing reserve should be considered for stage 1 and 2. A reserve of 10 cubic meters would provide for a range of 12 to 30 units in these areas, depending on the types of housing or mixed use development. That would total 18 cubic meters unreserved allocated available to add to staging area reserves as a further contingency or as a general reserve to allocate to other new developments at time of approval. As noted in table 3, we do have a shortfall of 420 cubic meters per day. So upgrades to the sewage treatment plant will be necessary to accommodate everybody who's requested allocation. These applications should continue to be processed with the understanding that holding provisions, conditions, and approval and development agreements will be required where necessary to ensure progression of the developments. Staff did review allocation policies from Wellington North and Orangeville, and we've attached draft servicing allocation policy, attachment 1 for council's discussion and consideration. Yeah, Steve and Steve from Steve Burnett and Associates and GSP Group were essential in this report. So if you have any more detailed questions, they're available to answer.
Councillor Hall.
Again, Jim, just for clarification, when I look at table 3 and I look at the basically the Fieldgate development, that 0.74 hectares of commercial, it shows that that's 70 cubic meters required in table 3, but then in the subsequent page, it's showing that it's actually only at 24 cubic meters. Is there a mismatch between the tables and the report?
If it's okay with you, Jim, I can maybe answer this one. Just to, through your worship, to Councillor Hall, the 70 cubic meters shown on table 3 is the combination of the 0.74 hectares of commercial and 71 additional units of residential. So the 24 cubic meters shown as sort of the recommendation for ICI is only the commercial portion. It would not include those residential units shown on table 3.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Buffett.
I'm not sure how to explain what my question is, because I don't know about everybody else, but I'm finding this more complicated the more we look at it. And I'd like to be able to get an understanding of what we could put in there and what we are left with in terms of how that impacts the applications we had earlier tonight and previously for the infill, as well as what we're looking at now, and see what we can do to come up with some kind of a way to make everybody as happy as we possibly can in doing so. So I don't know if there's an answer to that question.
Steve, do you want to take a run at it?
Well, if I can quickly, summarize what we're saying here, or what we're recommending, it's that I think one of the key impetus for doing this review was, are there developers sitting on capacity that they're not planning to use or may not use for several years that could be revisited and borrowed to other developments or reallocated for a temporary period of time? And the answer to that is from the special meeting we had on April 28th is those owners wouldn't support that. They want to maintain their allocations. So recommendation number 2, after receiving the report, is to renew those allocations to those 3 draft approved developments that are all moving through the process and planning to use that capacity in short order. So that puts us back to the drawing board in some ways, that we're still at the 79 cubic meters per day that we had previously expected was available, unallocated. And of that, what we're recommending is that rather than have it sitting in an unspecified pot that's just available for the first next development to come forward, we're suggesting, let's be strategic about how it's reserved for additional development. So we've identified what we feel are 2 priorities that council should consider. One would be ICI development. The majority of the remaining capacity in the plant is allocated already for residential. So there's not a healthy balance there of ICI to complement that. And yet we have key ICI developments in process. So a school expansion at Highland Heights. We have the Fieldgate commercial development you heard more about tonight. When we have Stella Jones, who's really a key industry, not only for the town, but for the entire west side of Shelburne, because if they don't build the force main through their property, then others are going to be held up in that whole west area. And then the second kind of priority additional to the ICI is, as we're seeing more and more of these applications are coming in with people looking to do a rental unit or a small infill development or sever a corner lot. something like that. A minor, 10 cubic meters per day is what we're suggesting there, just so that those applications can be considered by council and not have to go back to considering servicing reserves every time these little applications come forward, and to recognize some of those will only require a building permit, so we have to track that against something. In terms of the policy, which is really the final recommendation, well, sorry, before I get to that, number 4 is about, there are a number of developments, as we know, who are not going to be able to be serviced by the current plant. And so what we're saying is that we're going to have to be creative in how we handle that once those get to an approval standpoint. So the 4th recommendation is really saying, okay, continue to process those, but recognizing there's going to need to be holding provisions, development agreements, conditions of approval that deal with servicing and the timing of when those developments might be able to move forward to construction, to make sure that they don't go too far relative to the wastewater plant upgrades. And then the 5th one is, this is where some options come in for council on the policy. So we've set out some pretty standard basic items in the policy attached to Jim's report. It's in section 3. You'll see a number of procedural things outlined there. Who would have to make requests for allocations, how would that be addressed, the annual reporting of, at least annual reporting to council of remaining capacity, tying those approvals to Planning Act approvals. Then under the 4 consideration discussion is the notion of the use it or lose it. And there's a few options outlined there. So right now, there is kind of a use it or lose it approach. Servicing capacity is tied to your development approval. If you lose your development approval or it expires, you lose your servicing capacity. However, there are other things that council could require. For example, a servicing agreement. Some municipalities say, once you've got your allocation, you have to enter an agreement with us. It's good for X amount of time, often 1 year. And even though you may have a development approval that runs for 3 years, you have to come back to us every year and renew your servicing. So that's one thing you could do. Another is, if you, in conjunction with that, if someone doesn't renew their servicing and they still have a conditional approval, they would have that conditional approval potentially without servicing, because then you could redistribute some of those reserves or allocations to other developers who are ready to go. And then the final one, which is something that Wellington North does as an example, is if you don't want to worry about your servicing capacity constantly being used up and running out in short order because of the pace of development, you could set annual limits and say, we're only going to allocate 100 units, 200 units, whatever the magic number may be, or the proper recommendation may be, so that the pace of development is more gradual. So those are some of the options there that you could consider. At this point, I think we're pretty comfortable with the system of tying it to the development approvals, because all of those are moving along. And most of those are 2 years into their 3-year approval, so they really only have a year to get registered and get under construction. And then the final part under the policies, there's some options about what, say you have multiple developments competing for remaining capacity, you're not sure who you want to allocate to, and they're all ready to go, what would you consider? So if you only have 79 cubic meters left, there's 5 developments ready for approval, they need collectively 200 cubic meters. How are you going to prioritize them? And there's some bullet points on the last 2 pages of the draft policy for your consideration that you could put into the policy, or we could put in for kind of council's framework of, if it's affordable housing, we're going to move that up or assign some points to that. If it's ICI or a certain type of ICI or industrial employment, that might get some additional points, or downtown redevelopment, that kind of thing. So a variety of options and ideas there, really stemming from your official plan. That's a really long, extensive answer, but those are the main things we're trying to cover in this. I don't know that the policy necessarily simplifies things, but the policy, I think, would clarify things, like make sure that everybody's working and reading from the same playbook, as opposed to people attacking it different ways.
Okay, just to ask a bit further, to that, with regards to the commercial, industrial, and institutional that you're looking at, like Fieldgate, Stella Jones, and the high school, that brings it to a total of 51 M3s per day. And if you took 79 and took that off, then that would be what we have left. Is that correct, or am I understanding that?
Yep, that's correct. So there's 18 that would still be in the general pot for unknown things that might come forward. And one thing we discussed at the staff level and with SBA is that really when you're getting down to the last 18 cubic meters per day of your 3,420 cubic meters per day, should you be allocating it? I mean, that's a bit of a concern if we get to that point. It may allow development applications to continue, but knowing that you don't necessarily want to fully approve those developments until you've got the wastewater plant upgrades underway, because you need a bit of wiggle room just for annual wet weather changes and that kind of thing.
So do we have any way of calculating the individual residential applications that we've seen and approved up until now, plus the ones that were on hold? How much of the remaining allocation that would use up?
So right now, there would be, I think it's in table 3. Yeah. So that 18 really compares with the 420 at the bottom. So there's, or sorry, with 499. So there's still quite a bit more required than the 18 that's remaining. So most of that development in that table, in the new requests section, other than the Fieldgate 0.74 hectare commercial, potentially the Scone development phase 2, 11 units, the rest in the last 3 rows. Stella Jones is in the 51 cubic meters per day that we're recommending, but the big residential developments would require the wastewater plant upgrades.
So we'd be able to do the Scone developments 11 and Stella Jones and the Fieldgate commercial with no problem?
Yes, the only caveat to that is with the Scone developments, it depends on their timing. So they do need, depending on what they propose, they may need site plan approval, potentially some variances or zone changes. And if other little infill developments eat away at that 10 meters cube per day that we recommended, you may then have to bring a little bit of that unallocated 18 cubic meters per day into the picture to accommodate the Scone phase 2 development. So I think it could be accommodated from what we know today.
So Steve, the recommendation to establish the 10 cubic meter per day reserve for intensification applications. I mean, obviously that relates to a couple that we've heard tonight and another one that's going to be addressed on the 14th. Would we still be smart? I mean, if this recommendation is approved and we establish that reserve, would we still be smart to condition any of those approvals on verification at that time that there's still allocation left in that reserve?
Yeah, I think that's a good touch point, even though they may have had their planning approval, and also to set some timing to it. In the past with these consent approvals and rezonings, we've put it in the table and said that's allocated. Some of them can take a long time though to then sell to an owner who's going to build and for that owner to build and so forth. So I think kind of earmarking them for a year and saying if you don't use your capacity within that year, you could go back to the town engineer and get your allocation again if you haven't built or got your building permit. And so I think you'll start to see more of those types of conditions as a kind of common thread in these types of applications coming forward.
So for example, on the 242 Main Street application, I mean, do we even have the ability to make that as a condition to enacting the bylaw though, or not?
That's the tricky part. We can really do it through committee of adjustment approvals because you can assign conditions and require development agreements on those as you can for subdivisions, but for rezonings, you can't make them conditional except through a holding provision, which means they have to come back again to council for a new application. So for a small one like 242 Main Street East, for example, there's no there's not really an easy way to do that other than a holding provision, which is probably overkill for one unit.
In terms of the draft policy then, so my understanding is that if you just want some direction from council and then a further draft will come back for approval later.
Yeah, the last 2 pages of that policy are really some bullet points, but they haven't been, written in the format of a policy. And whether council wants to take this back and take some more time to look at it and give some thoughts, or have that conversation tonight, either way, we would take that input and then come back to you with a revised version for consideration in the future.
I mean, for me personally, I kind of do like the approach of a service agreement where, at least we look at that on an annual basis. At least in the interim, until the expanded plan is done. Because I think that just, creates a little bit more accountability on the part of the applicants to make sure things are moving ahead at the pace that, that they've told us they're going to. And if they're not, then that at least gives us a mechanism to perhaps reallocate that if needed. But, thoughts from anybody else on that? Councillor Buffett, I think that was kind of the main thrust of your intention, in bringing forward the use it or lose it principle.
Right.
The only other thought I would have, Steve, in terms of the bullet points that are listed there, in terms of the, trying to rank priorities if we have competing applications with limited accommodation. In the absence of any sort of prescribed list like that, it's still ultimately up to council's discretion to make those judgment calls as this body sees fit, right?
It is. There's, in the examples we looked at, there's a range of how prescriptive these things are, these criteria. Some, like Wellington North as an example, actually has weighting and scoring criteria. And so it's a numerical exercise. There's a little bit of discretion on how many points you might award. But if it's affordable housing, you might get 5 points. If it's infill development or downtown, it might get another 10 points. And then they list them and say, here's the allocation requests for 2021. Here's the highest ranking 5 developments. Those are the ones we recommend for allocation. These other 5 will have to wait for next year, and away you go. 2, council may wish to consider the following kind of language where it's, yeah, these are things that are on your mind, but may not be as prescriptive as we're going to wait and score these and rank them numerically.
I mean, for myself, I think I want to give that some more thought. My initial gut reaction is I think I'd probably lean more in favor of the sort of, principles to guide council's decision as opposed to a scoring mechanism.
Yeah, that's what we would recommend as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure how keen I am in being tied to a scorecard when you have competing applications, and that there may be some other real-time practical concerns on the table that aren't reflected by a scorecard. So we can give this some more thought and kind of approve the final policy at a later date then.
Sounds good.
Any other thoughts or questions from council? No, okay. So it's a long resolution, but it reads as follows: be it resolved, the council receives report D 2021-03 sewage capacity allocation dated May 31st, 2021 for information purposes. And the council renew the allocation of servicing capacity to previously allocated draft plans of subdivision or condominium, including Shelburne 89 developments, which is Fieldgate, Centerville, Shelburne Inc., and Scone developments, Stone Ridge. And that such allocation of the service shall run with the draft plan approval until the plan is registered and all dwelling units are constructed and occupied, or until expiry of the applicable draft plan or plans, whichever occurs first. And that council establish servicing reserves of 51 cubic meters per day for ICI development in the stage 2 area, and 10 cubic meters per day for residential and mixed use infill and intensification in the stage 1 and stage 2 areas. And the council directs that applications in process for development that exceeds the remaining unallocated servicing capacity may continue to be processed on the basis of the ongoing environmental assessments and related design work for future infrastructure capacity upgrades, and subject to holding provisions, conditions of approval, development agreements, and/or other planning and legal instruments, and may be recommended by staff for council consideration at the time of development approval as appropriate. And finally, the council considers the draft servicing allocation policy further reviewed and finalized by staff and brought back to council for final approval. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? By Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Is there any further discussion on that one? All in favor? Carried. Thank you, guys. I know that was probably a lot of work pulling that together, but I do think it helps give us a bit clearer direction moving forward for the next couple of years with the limited capacity that we do have. So much appreciated. Jennifer, can I bring up that planning matter again now, just so we don't lose sight of it later on? Is that good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So turning back to the zoning amendment application, now that we've considered the allocation report and essentially created that 10 cubic meter per day reserve for intensification, are there any thoughts on Mr. Higgins' application? One way or another? Don't all speak at once. Councillor Wagner?
Yes, thank you very much. So just as Councillor Buffett had said, it's kind of gotten a little crazy for me. It's like more that the more we talk about it, the more I don't know what we're going to do. So if we give this approval for this, are we setting ourselves up for any issues with potentially either approving the others that have come to our table recently or not approving the others? Like this is where my concern lies as well. I mean, we know that the Smith application is going to be coming back, and it was brought to us first, and then we just deferred Mrs. Osborne's as well. So I just don't know where we're supposed to go sort of from here. Can we approve them all, or we approve them or we don't approve them at all? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't want to be stuck approving one over the other and then, being, wrong. I don't know. That's just my thought is just making sure that we're fair for everybody.
Steve?
Yeah, so with the recommendation or the resolution that was just passed, all of those units are in the stage 1 area. They're all well within the 10 cubic meters per day that we've just recommended, and which is for anywhere from 12 to 32 units. The 32 is if they're all apartments. Those 4 are all apartments, accessory apartments, in an existing dwelling. So, essentially we're down 4. As soon as those 4 are approved tonight, it would just be 1 for if you're going to approve the bylaw for 242 Main Street East. That doesn't afford any special rights of objection or appeal dealing with that one tonight versus June 14th as compared with the others. It's really a procedural issue because the one for 105 Mill Street was specifically deferred to June 14th, not knowing what might transpire tonight. And the others were dealt with by the Committee of Adjustment, so you couldn't, deal with them before the council meeting. So it's really a matter of practicality and necessity because of the procedures that you have to follow. There's no special appeal or objection for dealing with the one tonight and the others later.
Okay, thank you so much. That helps.
So I guess my thought, Stephen, in terms of that 10 cubic meter per day reserve that we've now just established for intensification applications. I mean, I guess as long as applications as they come in sort of meet the the planning requirements, then it's more or less going to be as sort of, you know, first come, first serve until that 10 cubic meters a day is exhausted.
Yep, that's correct. There would be, you know, no more having to, it would provide some certainty that we could continue to receive those kinds of applications, and each one will still be reviewed on its merits and all the public input will be considered, but servicing would no longer be kind of a question mark. As of the previous meeting, we've had a number of inquiries about others who were wondering if they should, you know, look at that property or this property to create a lot or something like that. And you know, it was a cautionary response to say either may not be servicing available or there's reserve. So I think there'll be some tuned in to this to decide whether they want to move forward with applications to do small infill developments.
Sure.
But the 10 cubic meters is reflective of what we think should at least look after what we anticipate through the rest of this year for that type of development, as well as hopefully well into next year.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Anderson, to your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, I'm all, I mean, I'm happy to hear that there's enough for at least the applications that have been put forward if we decide to approve those. I guess for me, it's just, I'm looking at it as a matter of principle and I guess to some degree fairness. We had these applications that came in before this application, at least one we heard where, you know, there was some potentially some financial hardships associated with a potential delay, and good reasons as to why that application should move earlier than it certainly has thus far. But we decided in our wisdom to postpone that. And so for me, I think it would be more appropriate in respect to those applications, even if there's enough to allocate for everyone involved. Again, if you decide to approve everyone, that it should be done on the 14th and not before that.
Okay. Councilor Bonato. Oh, you're muted.
I got 2 points, I guess. One, 1.1, I agree with the deputy mayor. I'm kind of concerned about fairness to the other people. And the 10 cubic meters that we have left, how many homes, apartments, or whatever you want to call it, you said it would create?
So if they were all single detached dwellings, it would only be, you know, about 12 to 14 kind of thing. But if it's a mix, or if it's all apartments, the other end of the spectrum would be more like 32, because there's such a smaller household size for an apartment than there is for a single detached home.
So when you mean a single detached home, you mean a unit in a single detached home, like an apartment in a single detached home, or do you mean a whole house?
A whole house. So these four that we're talking about, like you know, a suite above the garage would just be an apartment in our view. It's going to have maybe 2 people, and so we don't have to worry about it being treated as a 4-person home.
So if people, we don't know how many people are coming forward with apartments or how many, and the result of the sewage treatment plant is we're not really going to see much for 3 years. Am I right in that one, Steve?
That's correct.
So at some point in time, doesn't matter that we create this reserve is going to run out in a year and maybe less. We don't know, because we don't know what the heck's coming at us. So at some point, we're going to be saying to people all over the place, sorry, come back in 2 years' time, maybe we'll have some capacity for you in the way of apartments or infill. Am I correct?
Steve?
Yeah, maybe through your worship, the intention of the 10 cubic meters was to set aside an allowance, as Steve said, to hopefully get through the next year and a half or so, maybe further. It really depends, as Councillor Bonato has pointed out, on how many applications came in. The lower number, being 12 units, was based on if it was a separate full unit, single dwelling. So say 3-bedroom house or a splitting of a lot, which I know council has dealt with in the past, where a second resident is actually built on the same property and there's a severance. So that would be up to 12 of those could be approved over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, while the sewage treatment plant is being upgraded. The alternative to that is if they were all apartments, as Steve has pointed out, it would be approximately 32. So of the 4 applications that have recently come forward, I believe those would all fall into that second end of the range. So we would be using up approximately 4 of the 32 that would be available. So obviously it's a mix of that. We don't know what's going to come forward. Council could have severances that come forward. They could have apartments that come forward similar to the 4 that are on the table. But that's why the 10 cubic meters was set, to allow council to make those decisions without necessarily having to worry about severances, or sorry, about servicing over the next year to year and a half. I don't think we'll butter it up. There's not a lot left. It's pretty tight, and so that's why that servicing was set.
So all you be making it easy for the next year and a half, because after that it's an election, and I can go out and say to people, "Sorry, you got no capacity for you." You know, you're making life a little easy for me in that sense there. But I am correct that at some point in time, we're going to say, we've got nothing left at all. Sorry, tough luck. We cannot take your application at this point in time. You'll have to wait. There is no sewage capacity available for you until that is upgraded.
Well, and I think to answer that one as well, to be clear, the resolution that was just passed would put those into a holding pattern. So they would go into a holding. We would entertain other applications. We would move them through the process. Some of those smaller ones may not be feasible on the time constraints of waiting or moving through for of old, where larger developments could probably continue through the planning, engineering reviews, environmental assessments, etc. But yeah, at some point we're awful tight. I don't think any of us are making this up. It could be a wet year that could throw us over that limit. So,
well, my concern is also the illegal ones we don't know anything about, and we have no application coming in. Do we have the ability to create some kind of a reserve for that as well? Because, you know, out of those 10 cubics that you have right now, and, you know, we went a year and a half down the road, we're getting close to the end, and all of a sudden, we've also got a bunch of illegals going in because people know that we're getting towards the end. And that's my concern, that we don't get ourselves into a hell of a lot of trouble.
Steve, that kind of stuff is factored in ordinarily, isn't it, into sort of the total reserve calculations? Like,
yeah, so right now our basis is based on whatever's there now. So if there are apartments that are not known or that are sitting there, then they are already being accounted for in the overall averages. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's a way to actually monitor illegal apartments or additions. This really is about making approvals for those that are following the policies.
Yeah, yeah, Steve, I guess you don't get, what I'm trying to get at is, like you mentioned, the wet year. We're so tight that if we have a bad wet year, we could be in trouble. And I'm saying the same thing, but a bunch of illegal apartments that may come in at some point in time that might put us into trouble. How much of a reserve, like, do we have there is what I'm trying to get at, so that we don't get ourselves into trouble. I don't want the Ministry of the Environment coming into town saying, "You fools, you've given up everything and your plant is, you know, done in."
Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, so although there's only 10 cubic meters per day identified for this kind of infill development, there is 550 cubic meters per day still of capacity, flow capacity at the plant. Just that we've been conservative. We've taken out some contingencies. We've accounted for all the homes that are being built right now. So definitely that becomes more of a concern as major new development becomes on stream, like as hundreds of homes are being built over the next 2 or 3 years. Certainly The next big one is the Fieldgate one with 257 homes. So those allocated developments are going to take some time to build out, which buys some time to get the additional capacity. So we don't actually get into a situation where there's an environmental hazard associated with the plant utilization. But the time is of the essence to get, either stricter controls on development as we get down to the wire on remaining capacity, or having improvements made. The other thing that the recommendations sort of buys you is some time to, again, do another annual update. So this gets looked at every year, and somewhat counterintuitively, although there's a lot of development, the assumptions made don't always pan out to be true in favor of even more development. So we've had in the past years significantly more development, but because we assume that that development would generate X wastewater, and then it generates Y, which is less, you have more free capacity. So you don't want to over allocate for sure, but I think we've got lots of contingencies built in to make sure we're not creating a potential environmental risk, at least at this point. We've got to continue to review that at least on an annual basis.
Okay.
Sorry, if development goes as development's been going in the last few years, I don't know if we've got that time frame that Steve's mentioning. It seems like it builds out extremely quick in this area. I mean, Highland Village is what, a year, and it's almost built out. And in the last few years, I don't think we've had all that kind of time, and that's where my worry is. That I know you think you're hoping that we have 2 to 3 years build out time frame, but it doesn't seem to work that way. Sorry, that's my last comment. I'll let it go from there.
So moving from the general back to the specific, then in terms of this application for 242 Main East, I mean, essentially there's two options, I guess. The deputy mayor seems to be suggesting that he would prefer to defer this to the 14th so that they're addressed, or sorry, that it's addressed at the same time as the other two that preceded this one. So that's one option. The other option is to deal with it tonight. So how do we want to proceed? Councillor Fegan?
As much as I hate to say it, I think I'm kind of on the same boat as well. I do think, to be fair to everybody, I think it really should be addressed all at the same time.
Okay. All right. Do we need a motion to defer that then, Madam Clerk?
My recommendation would be that you receive the report and defer it to the June 14th meeting.
Okay. Councillor Fegan, do you want to make that motion?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
Deputy Mayor, do you want to second it? Okay. All right. So motion on the floor to receive the report and to defer the consideration of the bylaw until the June 14th meeting. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Okay. Item number 2. Report from the town planner regarding Shelburne 89 developments, the subdivision agreement for 900 Main Street East.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a fairly long agreement, as they are, but is very similar to Highland Village's subdivision agreement. So I won't get into an exhaustive review of it. In the report accompanying the agreement, I've highlighted some of the more unique aspects of the development, obviously the mix with commercial blocks and the central neighborhood park in the development. Similar to Highland Village, this development will include a pumping station, which will double as a park washroom building. That's currently being serviced right now for the future construction of that building, probably in the near future. The work that's being undertaken right now is under a pre-servicing agreement on site. The subdivision agreement takes it to the next step where it's understood that the infrastructure, provided this plan is actually registered and built out, that there's a process for the developer to eventually gain the town's final acceptance and for the town to assume the roads and services and the park and so forth in the development. So pre-servicing is a little bit different in that respect. There's a big financial impact in that this obviously will bring on significant additional development charges, assessment. There will be a number of securities and deposits required as part of the agreement and set out therein. Some of those numbers are still being finalized as we work through the final engineering designs and the cost estimates for that work, as that drives the actual security amount. We've had a good consultation and communication with town solicitor and review bi-weekly with Fieldgate the ongoing matters of the pre-servicing of the development, as well as the next steps to move the plan from draft approved to registered. So beyond this subdivision agreement, there will be one more touch point with council requesting final approval of the plan. At final approval, that means all of the conditions have been cleared and the developer can proceed to register the actual lots. So create the lot lines for all the lots and blocks in the development. So you'll see in the report, I've attached the draft M plan. All that really is the surveyed final plan that implements the draft approved plan. So a little bit more detailed and precise, and sets all the exact limits of all the lots and blocks and roads and so forth. Puts the street names on as well. It hasn't changed in any significant way from the draft plan that you've seen several times previously. So it's really just implementing that. There's quite a bit of land that will come into town ownership with the eventual registration of the plan and by virtue of the subdivision agreement. So I just want to make sure that council's understanding of that. All of the northerly natural environment areas in this property would come into municipal ownership, really primarily for natural areas preservation, though there may be opportunity for some passive use such as trails and that kind of thing. The park in the central part of the development is one of the larger blocks of land that would be conveyed to the town as well. And then the stormwater management facility on the north side of Main Street in the southeast corner of the development. There's a few smaller parts that are identified as well, and the buffers around the edges of the woodland. And the pumping station is included within the large park block in the center. All of the rest is essentially for the mix of single detached townhomes and commercial development. And there will be a separate application and planning approval required for block 215, which is the block fronting on the county road, which we've had some pre-application consultation with Fieldgate on that, but we have not received the details of an application yet. So the process with the subdivision agreement is there's a bylaw. The bylaw would essentially authorize the mayor and the clerk to sign the agreement once all of the final details have been inserted. I'm not expecting any substantive changes to the agreement. It's gone through a few rounds of review with legal counsel and has been reviewed by Fieldgate as well. We have received some advice from the town's insurer on some of the insurance clauses and may need some final adjustments to that wording. But otherwise, in my opinion, the agreement is ready for authorization by council so that it can be finalized and ultimately executed. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on this report and agreement.
Okay, questions for Steve on the subdivision agreement? None? Okay. So the resolution reads, be it resolved, council receives report P 2021-17 regarding the subdivision agreement for Shelburne 89 Developments Limited, Fieldgate Emerald Crossing subdivision, and that leave be given for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 29-2021 to enter into a subdivision agreement with Shelburne 89 Developments Limited for the Fieldgate Emerald Crossing subdivision development, and to authorize the mayor or his designate and the clerk to execute the agreement substantially in the form attached to the bylaw. Get a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any further discussion? All in favor? That's carried. Okay, so next is another planning report regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for 600 Main Street East for Centerville Inc.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have, because the zoning details of this development are a bit complicated, I just have a couple of slides just to make sure council's aware of those details. Give me one moment while I put this on screen. The original zoning bylaw amendment application for this property came in at the same time as the draft plan of subdivision application. So it was actually considered by the previous council in a public meeting some time ago. The reason that the zoning was not finally approved with the draft plan approval is that it was agreed with the applicant at the time that we should have some more detailed review of the engineering designs, ensure that there's not going to be any significant changes to the number of units, the lot sizes, the blocks, all of those kinds of things before finalizing the zoning details. Otherwise, they would have gotten themselves into a situation where they would have an approved zoning for the site and then have to come back and further adjust it when they go to register their plan and go through additional rounds of consultation and notice, et cetera. So they finally have reached a point where the developer has, Centerville Homes has advanced the site to a detailed design, and the zoning details are all finalized and haven't really changed significantly from that original application. The site, as you know, is located north of Main Street, so shown on that slide on the east side of town. It's a little bit hard to read this slide, but pretty much the entire development is street fronting towns on a common element condominium road that winds through from the north side of Main Street over to Centennial. There is a condominium aspect to this development, very similar to the Scone Maribel Homes development, where the road and the landscaped areas and the stormwater facility will all be privately owned in common by all of the units in the development. The units themselves are not condominiums, but they are parcels of tied land to the common elements in the development. So the good thing about this kind of development for the town is that all of those things are fully the responsibility of that group of owners in that development under a condominium bylaw and agreement, and they will pay condominium fees for the maintenance of those things. The town does not have to assume that infrastructure and take care of it or assume it for going forward on maintenance and so forth. So on to the details of the zoning. About 50% of the site is currently zoned R5 already. The east half has historically been zoned industrial because it's kind of on the edge of the residential and industrial area. However, is designated in the OP to allow for residential use. So these gray shaded rows indicate which provisions are proposed to be varied from the standard R5 zone. Lot area ranges, and again, this is not a function of every lot requiring a reduction in the lot area, but rather about half the lots are slightly below the 180 or 185, and a few, because of their irregular shape, because of the irregular shape of the overall property, are about 30 square meters smaller. So not too many in the lower range, and in the end, it doesn't make a significant difference in the look and feel of the development when you get into it. A few minor adjustments to the frontage of 3 lots on corner lots. About half the lots, again, have a slightly reduced front yard, but the thing I want to emphasize here is all of them will have at least a 6-meter long driveway for parking, as well as an attached garage. So two spaces for each unit on each lot. And there's also 11 visitor parking spaces in common. The exterior side yards are reduced. Again, it's just a more compact development. The 5 corner lots are tighter to the condominium road, and not really as much of a concern in this type of development, because as I say, the condo road is fully the responsibility of the condominium and the owners of the development. Rear yard, some 35 lots would have a bit of a reduction. Only 1 or 2 have a portion of their rear yard that's this small in the 4-meter range. And again, it's because some of the lot lines are angled, and so it's the pinch point where it gets a little bit narrower. And then finally, the lot coverage does get quite a bit higher than 45% as the maximum on some of the lots, but it's not the overwhelming majority. So again, the overall pattern of development is in keeping with the general intent of the bylaw. So 3 primary zones would apply to the development. There's 2 semi-detached units on Main Street right down here. So 2 attached units that would front towards Main Street but be accessed from the condo road behind. Those would be zoned R59 just to permit semi-detached in that location, a slightly reduced exterior side yard and a reduced minimum rear yard, and to orient the lots towards Main Street. The R510 zone will apply to the majority of the townhomes in the development, with all of those site specifics that I just talked about. And then the other lots in the development that aren't R5, 9, or 10 would be just the straight R5 and meet all of those standards. And then the common landscaped areas would be OSR3, so a special open space recreation zone, just to clarify the permitted uses, which would be restricted to landscaping and amenities for the condominium. So this is the site plan. It's fully detailed with all of the locations of the units and their widths and depths, and there's some variety in the different lots sizes. The units get smaller or larger as well, with end units and interior units. And there's a stormwater facility here that will be built, and some common parking closer to Main Street. This just illustrates an example of one of the issues that I was talking about, why they need site-specific zoning. You can see, for example, this lot number 12 is a bit of a pinch point where the site angles together. And so although it's 7 meters for the most part, at its narrower point is 4.5 meters. So that's those kinds of situations are really the reason for these site-specific provisions. And then you can see as you go further south, the lots just get deeper and the rear yards get larger. So this is, it looks like a bit of a hodgepodge, but in the end, this is the zoning that's necessary to reflect the lot sizes and units that are proposed. So several of the units will just be the standard R5 zone as indicated in here. Most of the townhomes though have that site-specific R510, R59 for the 2 semis. One correction from the report and bylaw that was circulated in the agenda package is this stormwater facility was labeled as OSR3, but it will actually be, is recommended for OSR2, which is the standard town-wide zone to restrictively zone stormwater facilities just to be used as stormwater facilities so they don't somehow get reused for something else. And then the OSR3 zones are for all of the landscaped areas and trails and buffer areas. Last point on this would be that there's a fairly significant land dedication to the town along the Besley Drain, which runs through here, and which will have the opportunity to accommodate a continuous trail that's shown from Main Street all the way up to the northeast part of the development. And ultimately that may be connected to Greenwood Park. This just illustrates the details of the amendment schedule. So the changes from one type of zone to another using different patterns and colors. So I'll stop sharing that. This has been reviewed in quite a bit of detail with the applicant, and we feel it's ready for council consideration to clear this condition of draft plan approval. Again, this is just another step forward for this development to move forward towards subdivision agreements and actual construction and registration. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them for you.
Okay. Any questions for the planner? Councillor Donato and then Councillor Wagner.
There were issues with the Besley Drain and flooding from the previous council where I was sitting on it, and I gather they've been answered. The other part that I have a problem with is you said landscaping on OSR3. can happen, they can landscape it? Because you've got that all around the Besley drain there. It's hard to read those drawings. My eyes are poor and I'm not able to see them on the screen the way they are. They're so small, even in my computer.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. There's a lot of detail there. So when I say landscaping, it's I mean the full range of could be in the case of the little park block or amenity space, just manicured grass. But along the Besley drain, it's more of an enhancement planting plan. So there's trees, other mixed seed to naturalize some of the area along the Besley drain. All of that is in accordance with approved landscape plans that both the town and the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority have to approve. So when I refer to landscaping, basically not the buildings themselves, not the roads themselves, but all that soft cover, trees, other natural areas, and kind of grass seeded areas throughout the development. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, my concern is with the Besley drain area. I'm not concerned with the park.
Mm-hmm.
I know what the Conservation Authority would like to see it because the water that streams out of there to be cooler. They want more trees and whatnot covering it, and with a trail going nearby it. But I don't want residents putting their little gardens back there because that's what we don't want in that drain area. So how is that written in so that it's utilized by the public, but at the same time we don't have backyard gates and people going through the backyards? You know what I'm trying to get at? Because we've had that issue before in other subdivisions.
Yeah, there will be continuous fencing along all of those lots, and there'll be, I think it's a 15-meter. It's been a while since I've looked at the. One of the things that shaped this development was the actual location of the flood line and how much of a setback that the NVCA required, and I think it was 15 meters all the way along the drain. So all of the lots, like the property lines that will be in private ownership, are set back from the actual drain itself, and the in-between land between the drain and the back of those properties will be dedicated to the town, so brought into town ownership, which is good not only to protect the drain and make sure it's properly treed and landscaped, but will also provide the trail opportunity, and also there's a trunk sanitary sewer that goes through there. That's right. It's in an easement right now, so the town doesn't own the land but has access to it. So this will bring that trunk sanitary sewer into full town ownership.
Yeah, I remember that. But what I guess I'm getting at is what type of fencing is on the backyards? Is it a chain link fence, a wood fence? What type of fencing are we requiring?
Yeah, the town standard is chain link, and I think that's what we've identified here, though I'd have to go. I don't think we've had final approved landscape plans for this yet, which would detail the fencing. So I'd have to go back to the conditions of approval and look at that further when we get into those detailed landscape plans.
Okay. And then the issue with the private road, I remember a discussion that there would be no vehicles parked on that road. And that's why we were talking about that parking lot that they have for visitors in there. Because if there's a fire, that's a narrow road, and our fire trucks are going to have a hell of a time getting in there if there's parked vehicles in there. And that I remember from the previous council discussion.
Yeah, the parking spaces were specifically included in the resolution from council when this was draft plan approved, that they wanted a condition of approval for as many visitor parking spaces as could be fit. And there are those spaces provided off the street, off the traveled lanes. Now, I'm not sure if you remember, Steve, but I think the width of a condominium road standard, the paved width from curb to curb, was the same as what we would require for a local municipal street. So I can't remember if that accommodated one side of on-street parking, because it's basically the same width from curb to curb.
Yeah, I think the reduction on this one was the right of way, not the actual
paved. Yeah.
portion. Yeah, so it is tight due to the right of way being tight, but the paved portion was the standard of the lowest or the smallest size that is acceptable under the town standards. So there should still be adequate access for fire routes, etc.
Even with vehicles.
Okay, Councillor Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm correct with, when I look at the plans, there is no designated park that's going to be provided to the community members in this little subdivision, correct?
That's correct. There's a little amenity space, a triangle in the kind of in the middle of the development, right across from the stormwater facility. But there are two things in terms of public parkland. One is the requirement to have the trail and a connection to Greenwood Park to try and get easy, efficient access to that park, which is pretty close by. And then the other is that's not going to fully satisfy what would normally be dedicated to the town as a park in a development of this size. So there would be a payment in lieu of the equivalent land value, so that the town can use that towards improvements to Greenwood Park or other park acquisition or improvements throughout the town.
Okay, because that was my next follow-up question is, although it's great that we're going to be receiving some of the lands in order to create a trail, my concern is, what the cost will be in order to create that trail and or connect with Greenwood, because we do have to build a small bridge over the Besley Drain. So, again, we always say, growth pays for growth or whatnot, but so where does that come into effect, right? Is it going to be enough of a cash in lieu of a park, for the community members in order to be building now what is going to be, a bridge that will be going over the Besley Drain, because that can get very costly, and putting that on taxpayers for development, I know I wouldn't be happy about that. So I just want to make sure, is there a way that we can, potentially request this development to actually put in a pathway connecting to Greenwood Park with a proper bridge?
Yep, that is one of the requirements. So they have to build the trail in the land that will be dedicated to the town. And then there is a condition for them to at least work with us to design the crossing of the Besley Drain. Right now, they've proposed to essentially use the existing wastewater plant driveway and widen that culvert out. And we have some concerns with that. So we've been reviewing that with the engineer, not wanting to direct pedestrians over to the wastewater plant area. So Steve's team went on site and looked at the woodland to the north of this site to see if there's a way to get across the drain without having big impacts on that little woodland. And so we think there is a spot where you can cross the drain more midway along the drain, not all the way over to the Centennial Road. So that will be a more efficient connection to Greenwood Park. And then the pedestrian bridge itself, the cost of that has been built into the development charge. So the way that will be paid for will be from development charges from this development, or this development will build the bridge and then get credits for the development charge portion of that. So we are making sure that all of those elements are going to be taken care of by the development. Yeah.
And that's something that will be done sort of at the same time as the development is done in the first place, right? Like not 2 or 3 years down the road. I mean, it's going to be part of, once this development is completed and people are living there, there is access to Greenwood Park.
The only unknown on that is we haven't secured with the NVCA or worked with the developer yet to determine with the NVCA where they will permit the crossing of the drain. Obviously, the NVCA's interest is to minimize those crossings and minimize the impact, but we will be working with them and the developer to see how quickly that can all come together.
Okay.
At this point, it's for the rezoning, but there will be further reports to council on the subdivision agreement where all of those details will be crystallized a little bit more.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anything else for Steve? Okay. So the resolution is receive report P 2021-18 for information and for leave to be given for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 30-2021, being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 38, 2007, by rezoning the lands known municipally as 600 Main Street East in the town of Shelburne from residential type 5, residential type 5 floodplain, employment floodplain, and natural environment to residential type 5, residential type 5 exception 9, residential type 5 exception 10, open space recreation exception, open space recreation exception 3, and natural environment as shown on Schedule A1 to the bylaw. I get a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, and we do need a motion to sit past 9:30.
We don't do it.
Then I guess June 14th is going to be even busier. All right, I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Fegan, thank you. All in favor? Carried. And keep in mind that the procedural bylaw, even though we are now extended past 9:30, does not allow us to sit past 11 o'clock. And we do still have a number of reports to get through. So let's try to move at a little quicker pace. So in that vein, Steve, the next three bylaws all deal with consent agreements, which essentially are just formalizing agreements that were conditions of previous severances that the Committee of Adjustment approved. Is there anything unusual about any of the three that we should be aware of? They're all standard form consent agreements.
They are. The only thing we've added for the one on Main Street East is that that lot slopes off, the new lot slopes off to the east. So we have some good rules about bringing fill in standard subdivision agreements. So we've added those rules into that agreement just to make sure fill is tested and certified and everything. So if they bring in any fill, it's going to be subject to all those requirements. The one for 302 First Avenue East, really nothing special or unique about that one. And then the one for 331 Victoria Street does have the added layer of an easement for the property at 327 Victoria Street, because there's those two sewer pipes that come into this property from the lane behind, and there's no proper easement for the existing homes that are serviced by those two sewer pipes. So the agreement includes a requirement to incorporate those easements, and we have received the easement documentation from the owner and their legal counsel now. So that's all looking like it's ready to move forward.
Okay.
Other than that, I think all three are ready for council consideration.
Okay, excellent. So we'll go through each one in turn. So in terms of so in terms of the first one then, what's the address on that one again, Steve?
It doesn't have a municipal address,
okay.
so it is just Main Street East. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So can I get a mover and seconder to receive that report and for the reading and enacting of that bylaw? Councillor Buffett, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, the second one for 302 First Avenue East, mover and seconder. Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Wegener. All in favor? It's carried. And finally, for 331 Victoria Street. Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, excellent.
Thank you very much.
That's it for you, I guess, Steve. Steve and Steve. Thank you, guys. See you on the 14th. Okay, next is a report regarding the County of Dufferin Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Jennifer, did you want to speak to that one?
I can just give a high-level overview. And so the county's report notes that the provincial government enacted legislation through the Comprehensive Ontario Police Services Act, requiring municipal governments to adopt community safety and well-being plans. The legislation states that every municipal council was required to develop and adopt these plans by working in partnership with a multi-sectoral advisory committee. The county was recognized as the lead for the coordination and development of the community safety and well-being plan, as detailed in their report. It notes who they engaged with, discussions. They've created the plan. It is attached to their report, and we are required to adopt the plan and forward to the province.
Okay. Any questions on that? If not, can I get a mover and seconder then to receive the report and to approve the community safety and well-being plan? Moved by Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, next is a letter from the Shelburne Police Services Board regarding the new OPP detachment board composition. So the letter was contained in the package. Any thoughts on that? So just in terms of process, what I can explain is that basically the province is looking to consolidate the number of OPP police service boards and to do so in some fashion by each detachment. So as it stands right now, the Dufferin County detachment has 7 separate municipal police service boards, 1 for each municipality. One of our municipalities in Dufferin County doesn't have a contract per se with OPP, so they don't have a board. So that means that the detachment commander has 7 separate police service board meetings to go to on a regular basis. So the province is trying to consolidate that. Now, what they've asked for is a submission from each detachment, not from each municipality, in June of this year as to how that detachment as a collective proposes to move forward with this. So what we've tried to do in Dufferin to organize some thoughts around this chaos is we've established a bit of a working group amongst the mayors. And we had an initial meeting and the thought was, look, let's go back to each of our respective boards and councils, see what the thoughts are, and then we'll reconvene as a mayor's group and try to cobble together some sort of submission based on consensus that we'll submit to the ministry and see what they say. Some early support seems to have emerged from some other municipalities to essentially divide the detachment into urban and rural spheres and just have one board for each of those 2 components. Our police service board, at least initially, had some concerns with that. And the thought was that we would like to maintain some autonomy, at least for the next couple of years until we work through the transition to OPP, and that it might be difficult if we're lumped in with Orangeville, who's going through a similar process too. Whether or not that ultimately will go anywhere with the province, I guess, will be seen. But any thoughts on the recommendation from the board? No. Okay. And that's fine. I mean, you know, there isn't an expectation necessarily that the council has to formally adopt the position on this. But if not, I guess this will kind of get thrown into the mix and be discussed as part of the preparations for the submission. Councillor Renato?
I see the point of keeping it separate from Orangeville. Orangeville is a bit larger and overwhelming to urbanize like Shelburne. And I'm gathering when you talk about urban boards, Grand Valley is not really a part of that urban mix. It's more of the rural side of it.
Yeah.
And the rules do have I kind of get urban components being together versus the rural because they are different and their situations and problems and what they have as compared to the urban. But I agree with you, maybe the timing is not correct right now. Maybe the rules can all combine together in the one board and make 3 boards. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean,
for the next couple of years, can we maybe propose that to the province?
as far as I'm concerned, we can propose whatever we want to propose. And I guess it remains to be seen what the province responds with. You know, in my opinion, all they can do is essentially come back and say, no, we don't like that. And we'll sort of go back to the drawing board. But
and my thought is like the rules, they don't have, they've already been policed. Like they have that. So for them to combine together as one board is a lot because they're in a different situation than what Shelburne and Orangeville is. So for them to combine, and maybe at your next meetings that can be discussed, you know, that if they want at that rural urban having 2 separate boards that way, maybe the fact that the rules can go ahead and create their board right now, just leave Shelburne and Orangeville through the transition period until we get through it, and then we'll combine together at that point in time.
And it could be, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the province wants to reduce this to the lowest possible number. But it could be that, you know, given the unique situation with 2 municipalities in Dufferin County having just recently transitioned to OPP, that they will, you know, recognize that as a unique situation and maybe give us a bit of a grace period. Again, all we can do is ask and put a submission in and see what they say.
Well, that would be my suggestion. I would like something like that to happen.
Okay. And any other thoughts?
Sounds good to me.
Oh, okay. Well, then why don't we just receive the letter and I'll sort of take this feedback back to the group and we'll see what we can hammer out. So can I get a mover and seconder then to receive the letter from Police Service Board? Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Hall. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, next is consideration of bylaw to strike the rates of taxation. Carrie, pretty routine stuff. Is there anything you want to point out on this one?
Thank you, through the mayor. It represents a 1.9% increase in the town portion. And when we drafted the 2021 budget in last November, the assessment rates had not been distributed yet. So we had projected that they would be the tax rate would come in at 1.62. So it is a little bit lower than what we had projected. And overall, when you include the county and the provincial rates, it lowers it again to 1.42% overall, which on an average home assessment would amount to approximately $39, a $39 increase for the town portion.
Okay.
That's it.
Any questions for Carrie? Okay. Get a motion then, be it resolved, leave be given for the reading and enacting a bylaw number 27-2021, being a bylaw to strike the rate of taxation and to further provide for penalty and interest and default of payment thereof for the year 2021. Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Okay, next is a resolution from the Accessibility Advisory Committee regarding accessible crosswalks. Just trying to find that in my agenda.
I can speak to that. The type of crosswalks the accessibility committee is looking for is that the lights, example, Fiddle Park and Owen Sound. Currently, those are, if you're hearing impaired or sight impaired, you do not have the buttons for crossing, the same as we have at William and Maine, and that's a concern. Also, if we can ask MTO, because I understand at Colonel Phillips, when they put the lights in there, we don't have, it's not within our control area on the highway. If we can maybe forward on a request to them to have that type of crosswalk there, and also at 124. So, and Greenwood and Maine is the other one that we were looking at. Anywhere that we have lights and crosswalks proper should have hearing for the sight impaired as well as the hearing impaired. And that's where the accessibility committee came with that motion.
Okay, so the committee's looking for this to sort of be factored in as part of consideration for next year's budget?
Yeah, I would gather at this point, I don't think it's within our budget, but if it's in next year's budget, that we start doing that on our current older ones, but anything new going in, make the request so that we're not going backwards trying to fill it.
Okay. Jim, did you have any comments on that?
Through your worship, yeah, our lights under our control would be Owen Sound and Main Street. So there's a double crossing there. Greenwood and Main Street, we've had a request come in to actually have that looked at for an audible system there. And I did get some quotes from our contractor that we have. They're about $16,000 for double crossing. So at this point, we were looking at including those in for consideration for the 2022 budget. But the other intersections, 124 and Main or 89 Highway, the new one at Colonel Phillips, that would be under MTO's jurisdiction there. So we'd have to make the request to them for those upgrades.
What about the one at Fiddle Park and Owen Sound? Is that one audible?
Through your worship, no, sorry, it is not. It does have the push buttons, but it doesn't have the audible alarms on it. So we'd have to have one too. So
yeah, it would be one as well for 2022. Anyway, that's where the motion. That's why the motion is there.
Okay, so I guess Jim, just take a note and maybe put some costs for budget.
Yeah. Is there a new one going out on 89 at some point in time? Where Highland?
Through your worship, we have nothing planned for out on the west end there by Highland currently. Down the road with any possible developments, maybe on the north side, we may have to look at that, but that would be included in traffic reviews for those subdivisions that would be coming online and down the road in the future.
Okay, and
I guess for the time being, there's nothing really to cross to on the north side there, right? So I mean, could stay on the south side, walk downtown, and if they have to cross to the north side of Main Street once they're downtown, they can use the existing ones.
Through your worship, it was identified with crossing guards, so we did have to put an additional crossing guard at Gordon and Main Street there, but yeah, there wasn't any notation of signalization or lighted crosswalk.
Okay, then have a mover and seconder then to receive the resolutions from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Councillor Bernardo. Seconder, Councillor Wagner. All in favor? Carried. Okay, and next was an add-on this morning. So it's a resolution from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And that resolution was included in the amended agenda. Deputy Mayor Anderson, do you want to speak to that one?
Sure. And I'm sure that Councillor Fegan and Councillor Wagner may want to comment as well. That statement or the suggestion that council maybe put out a statement to address the conflict, as I'll put it, in Gaza was something that the committee felt was appropriate to do at the time. Obviously, things, thankfully, I think we're all pleased to say at this point in time have changed, right? The statement was really calling for an end of the violence and a ceasefire, etc. And those things, at least at this point, have occurred. So I think the recommendation as it stands right now would make sense on its face because of what's transpired. It may be the wisdom of the committee, considering the recent events, to say they may want to put out something revised that speaks to the current circumstances and the continuance rather of a peaceful resolution that would satisfy both sides. But that's not a decision for me to make. Maybe the committee may decide to do that. So my suggestion would be that maybe we just receive the correspondence. The next time the D&I committee meets, there might be some discussion, I'm sure there will be, as to whether they want to park it or want to revise something to send it back to council at that point in time to consider. So that's just my thoughts on that.
Okay. Councillor Fegan, Councillor Wagner. Councillor Fegan.
I think Deputy Mayor Anderson phrased it quite well. It's the statement was made for the conflict that was going on at the time, and thankfully that night the ceasefire happened. So at this point, realistically, I see this kind of as a moot point. So just receiving makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, Councillor Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much. I have to fully agree. Deputy Mayor Anderson stated it very well. I think it'll go back to the DEI committee, and then we will come forward with something new. But I agree. Just we'll receive it and we'll go back to the DEI committee and go from there. Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. All right, then, can I get a motion to receive that resolution for information? Councillor Fegan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? Carried. Okay, notices of motion. Councillor Fegan, you have one, you sent that through to the clerk?
I did, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Deputy Mayor Anderson?
Yeah, and this will be really quick because I know we all want to tune into something more important that, well, I wouldn't say more important, but important.
Careful.
So I'll be quick. These are two quick notice of motions. One being, and this dovetails, in my opinion, in line with the community safety plan and the requirement for municipalities to have a plan, particularly as it deals with discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things it talks about in this report is having measurables like policies and procedures, et cetera. So where this takes me is I want to bring a notice of motion that the funds to do a diversity audit, which would look at our policies and procedures, make recommendations, fill in the gaps, et cetera, be paid for not out of the budget of the D&I committee. I think it's something that should be paid for by, I don't know, let me just put it this way, out of another portfolio other than the D&I committee, because with the money that is there, if we use the committee to pay for the diversity audit, I think it will leave literally probably a few cents for the committee to deal with for other initiatives, including training for the committee itself. So I know I had a preliminary conversation with Councillor Wagner on this, and I was able to get, I believe, certainly her thoughts on seconding this at the appropriate time. So I don't know, Councillor Wagner, you want to speak to that as well, just briefly?
Yes, thank you very much, Deputy Anderson. I do agree. During the DEI committee, we discussed some of the recommendations from the task force, and this was obviously one of the big moves, and one of the recommendations that the task force brought forward to council. And so my question at that moment was, I know we had set some budget aside for the DEI committee, and that my voice was that I didn't think it would be right of that fund or fee to come out of the DEI committee's budget. So especially because it was a recommendation from the task force, which we all know was very important to receive those recommendations. So for me, I think seconding this is a given. That funding should come from whatever funding council sees fit, but it should not come from the DEI committee's budget that was recently given to them. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll consider that on the 14th, and you had a second one?
Yeah, I do, and you're right. I probably should have been seconding that because I really stole that from Councillor Wagner. The other one is just based on the discussion, and this may be premature, but we'll see. I'll put it out there anyways because, heck, I already wrote it already, so I might as well just put it out there now instead of taking it off the table. But what I'm proposing for the next notice of motion is to make an amendment potentially to our land acknowledgement to include the Haudenosaunee group in our land acknowledgement. It would appear to me, just based on my conversations with our counterparts at the county, that they have a presence, certainly not within Dufferin County, but in Shelburne itself. And so my suggestion would be just to make a minor amendment to include them in the land acknowledgement. Those are the two quick ones. And the last one, this is not a notice of motion, and I'm going to end with this. I got a message just during our meeting from somebody in the community who was inquiring about the ability to be able to hold a vigil at a park in memory and honor of the 215 victims, and what would be required in order to do that. And so I don't know if the person has to reach out to staff, maybe through Jennifer, to put that proposal forward, then that comes to us. Jennifer's nodding her head, so I suspect that's probably the appropriate protocol, Jennifer.
Yes, it would be best if they reach out to town staff and we can advise them on protocol and procedure.
Okay, thank you very much. That is it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Jennifer?
Just one request for Councillor Fegan to read his notice of motion into the record.
Oh, sorry. Do you have that in front of you, Councillor Fegan? Your notice of motion? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, keep pushing the buttons like crazy. I do have it in front of me, but before I read it into the record, I'm going to ask that I've rephrased what I was asking, and what I'm going to ask is, with council's permission or support, council's indulgence, I'd actually like to deal with this tonight if possible. So the motion as it's written is, be it resolved that council requests the proposed lettering for Jack Downing Park be removed from the project. The idea that I want to have it dealt with tonight being that if we can save staff time and funds, we might as well deal with it now. Like I said, I don't feel that this is appropriate time for spending this kind of money. The community has expressed severe concerns regarding this on social media all over the place. And it really, to me, just doesn't fit the small town community feel and the charm that we're trying to establish within the downtown core. So my request then is to put that into the table and then ask to see if we have the 2/3 support that we need to deal with that tonight.
Okay. So procedurally, Jennifer, to consider it tonight, we need unanimous consent?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. So are there any objections to dealing with the notice of motion this evening?
I won't deal with it tonight.
Sorry?
I'm not going to deal with it tonight.
So I guess that's our answer.
It's 10:50. Sorry.
So because we have one objection, then Madam Clerk, we can't deal with the notice of motion this evening.
That's correct. It'll have to go to the next meeting.
Okay, well then, you know what? I'll actually take it back off the table since obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, but I believe the report is scheduled to be coming out next meeting anyway.
Through the mayor, yes, our intent was to have the report back with the concept plans and the costing for the letters. We were doing a number of concept plans for Jack Downing Park at that meeting. Alternatively, if we can't make it, it'll come back on June the 28th, but our hope was the 14th so that we could get the goals of having the park done by mid-September completed.
Okay, so maybe we'll just leave it on the table then for the next meeting.
Okay. Oh, we can argue it out on the 14th then.
Energy, yeah.
Okay. All right. Any more notices of motion? No. Okay. On to communications then. Anything that anybody wants to pull out?
Just want to say, Mayor Mills, that I don't know if this is part of the communications, but there was a chair and vice chair that was chosen for the D&I committee, Marcia Murdoch, and I believe David Egbert as the vice chair for the D&I committee. Thank you.
Okay. Just one thing that I did want to pull out quickly. I believe it's item number 2, the CDRC financial forecast update. I think, as most of us suspected, this would probably be coming because their earlier assumption was based on the fact that some programming may resume in the spring, which obviously has not happened. Carrie, did you have any comments on that? I mean, it seems as though there isn't a major implication financially at this point, but the tone of the letter more or less seemed to say stay tuned.
Yes, and we won't see the effects of that until this time next year when they present their 2022 budget, whether they experience as big of a deficit due to COVID in 2022 in 2021 as they did in 2020. So all we can do is just budget accordingly, like we did this year, and hope that it's not as such a high number.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, then can I get a motion to receive the items listed under communications? Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? Carried. Mover and seconder for the confirming bylaw. Councillor Bernardo, Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? Carried. And the one we've all been waiting for, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried.
Yeah.
Think the hockey game's over.
Who won?
3-1 Montreal.
Montreal.